The Diary of a Madman. He was dead, the head of a high tribunal, the upright magistrate whose irreproachable life was a proverb in all the courts of France. Advocates, young counsellors, judges had greeted him at sight of his large, thin, pale face, lighted up by two sparkling, deep-set eyes, bowing low in token of respect. He had passed his life in pursuing crime and in protecting the weak. Swindlers and murderers had no more redoubtable enemy, for he seemed to read the most secret thoughts of their minds. He was dead now, at the age of 82, honored by the homage and followed by the regrets of a whole people. Soldiers in red trousers had escorted him to the tomb, and men in white cravats had spoken words and shed tears that seemed to be sincere beside his grave. But here's the strange paper found by the dismayed notary in the desk where he had kept the records of great criminals. It was entitled, Why? 20th June, 1851. I have just left court. I have condemned Blondel to death. Now why did this man kill his 5 children? Frequently one meets with people to whom the destruction of life is a pleasure. Yes, it should be a pleasure, the greatest of all, perhaps, for is not killing the next thing to creating? To make and to destroy. These 2 words contain the history of the universe, all the history of worlds, all that is, all. Why is it not intoxicating to kill? 25th June. To think that a being is there who lives, who walks, who runs. A being? What is a being? That animated thing that bears in it the principle of motion and a will ruling that motion. It is attached to nothing, this thing. Its feet do not belong to the ground. It is a grain of life that moves on the earth, and this grain of life, coming I know not whence, one can destroy at one's will. Then nothing more. It perishes. It is finished. 26th June. Why then is it a crime to kill? Yes, why? On the contrary, it is the law of nature. The mission of every being is to kill. He kills to live, and he kills to kill. The beast kills without ceasing all day, every instant of his existence. Man kills without ceasing to nourish himself, but since he needs, besides to kill for pleasure, he has invented hunting. The child kills the insects he finds, the little birds, all the little animals that come in his way. But this does not suffice for the irresistible need to massacre that is in us. It is not enough to kill beasts. We must kill man too. Long ago this need was satisfied by human sacrifices. Now the requirements of social life have made murder a crime. We condemn and punish the assassin. But as we cannot live without yielding to this natural and imperious instinct of death, we relieve ourselves from time to time by wars. Then a whole nation slaughters another nation. It is a feast of blood, a feast that maddens armies and that intoxicates civilians, women, and children who read by lamplight at night the feverish story of massacre. One might suppose that those destined to accomplish these butcheries of men would be despised. No, they are loaded with honors. They are clad in gold and in resplendent garments. They wear plumes on their heads and ornaments on their breasts, and they are given crosses, rewards, titles of every kind. They are proud, respected, loved by women, cheered by the crowd, solely because their mission is to shed human blood. They drag through the streets their instruments of death, that the passer-by, clad in black, looks on with envy. For to kill is the great law set by nature in the heart of existence. There is nothing more beautiful and honorable than killing. 30th June. To kill is the law, because nature loves eternal youth. She seems to cry in all her unconscious acts, "Quick, quick, quick!" The more she destroys, the more she renews herself. 2nd July. A human being. What is a human being? Through thought it is a reflection of all that is. Through memory and science it is an abridged edition of the universe whose history it represents. A mirror of things and of nations. Each human being becomes a microcosm in the macrocosm. 3rd July. It must be a pleasure, unique and full of zest, to kill. To have there before one the living, thinking being, to make therein a little hole, nothing but a little hole, to see that red thing flow which is the blood which makes life, and to have before one only a heap of limp flesh, cold, inert, void of thought. 5th August. I, who have passed my life in judging, condemning, killing by the spoken word, killing by the guillotine those who had killed by the knife, I, if I should do as all the assassins have done whom I have smitten, who would know it? 10th August. Who would ever know? Who would ever suspect me? Me. Especially if I should choose a being I had no interest in doing away with. 15th August. The temptation has come to me. It pervades my whole being. My hands tremble with the desire to kill. 22nd August. I could resist no longer. I killed a little creature as an experiment for a beginning. Jean, my servant, had a goldfinch in a cage hung in the office window. I sent him on an errand, and I took the little bird in my hand where I felt its heartbeat. It was warm. I went up to my room. From time to time I squeezed it tighter. Its heart beat faster. This was atrocious and delicious. I was near choking it, but I could not see the blood. Then I took scissors, short nail scissors, and I cut its throat with 3 slits quite gently. It opened its bill. It struggled to escape me, but I held it. Oh, I held it. I could have held a mad dog, and I saw the blood trickle. And then I did as assassins do, real ones. I washed the scissors, I washed my hands. I sprinkled water and took the body, the corpse, to the garden to hide it. I buried it under a strawberry plant. It will never be found. Every day I shall eat a strawberry from that plant. How one can enjoy life when one knows how. My servant cried. He thought his bird flown. How could he suspect me? 25th August. I must kill a man. I must. 30th August. It is done. But what a little thing. I had gone for a walk in the forest of Verne. I was thinking of nothing, literally nothing. A child was in the road, a little child eating a slice of bread and butter. He stops to see me pass and says, "Good day, Mr. President." And the thought enters my head, shall I kill him? I answer, "You are alone, my boy?" "Yes, sir." "All alone in the wood?" "Yes, sir." The wish to kill him intoxicated me like wine. I approached him quite softly, persuaded that he was going to run away, and suddenly I seized him by the throat. He looked at me with terror in his eyes. Such eyes! He held my wrists in his little hands, and his body writhed like a feather over the fire. Then he moved no more. I threw the body in the ditch, and some weeds on top of it. I returned home and dined well. What a little thing it was! In the evening I was very gay, light, rejuvenated. I passed the evening at the prefect's. They found me witty. But I have not seen blood. I am tranquil. 31st August. The body has been discovered. They are hunting for the assassin. 1st September. 2 tramps have been arrested. Proofs are lacking. 2nd September. The parents have been to see me. They wept. 6th October. Nothing has been discovered. Some strolling vagabond must have done the deed. If I had seen the blood flow, it seems to me, I should be tranquil now. The desire to kill is in my blood. It is like the passion of youth at 20. 20th October. Yet another. I was walking by the river after breakfast, and I saw under a willow a fisherman asleep. It was noon. A spade was standing in a potato field nearby, as if expressly for me. I took it. I returned. I raised it like a club, and with one blow of the edge I cleft the fisherman's head. Oh, he bled, this one. Rose-colored blood. It flowed into the water quite gently, and I went away with a grave step. If I had been seen, I should have made an excellent assassin. 25th October. The affair of the fisherman makes a great stir. His nephew, who fished with him, is charged with the murder. 26th October. The examining magistrate affirms that the nephew is guilty. Everybody in town believes it. 27th October. The nephew makes a very poor witness. He had gone to the village to buy bread and cheese, he declared. He swore that his uncle had been killed in his absence. Who would believe him? 28th October. The nephew has all but confessed they had badgered him so. Justice. 15th November. There are overwhelming proofs against the nephew who was his uncle's heir. I shall preside at the sessions. 25th January. To death! To death! To death! I have had him condemned to death. The Advocate General spoke like an angel. Yet another. I shall go to see him executed. 10th March. It is done. They guillotined him this morning. He died very well. Very well. That gave me pleasure. How fine it is to see a man's head cut off. Now I shall wait. I can wait. It would take such a little thing to let myself be caught. The manuscript contained yet other pages, but without relating any new crime. Alienist physicians to whom the awful story has been submitted declare that there are in the world many undiscovered madmen as adroit and as much to be feared as this monstrous lunatic. The Spasm. The hotel guests slowly entered the dining room and took their places. The waiters did not hurry themselves in order to give the latecomers a chance and thus avoid the trouble of bringing in the dishes a second time. The old bathers, the habituates, whose season was almost over, gazed toward the door whenever it opened to see what new faces might appear. This is the principal distraction of watering places. People look forward to the dinner hour in order to inspect each day's new arrivals, to find out who they are, what they do, and what they think. We always have a vague desire to meet pleasant people, to make agreeable acquaintances, perhaps to meet with a love adventure. In this life of elbowings, unknown strangers assume an extreme importance. Curiosity is aroused, sympathy is ready to exhibit itself, and sociability is the order of the day. We cherish antipathies for a week, and friendships for a month. We see people with different eyes when we view them through the medium of acquaintanceship at watering places. We discover in men suddenly after an hour's chat, in the evening after dinner, under the trees in the park where the healing spring bubbles up, a high intelligence and astonishing merits, and a month afterward we have completely forgotten these new friends, who were so fascinating when we first met them. Permanent and serious ties are also formed here sooner than anywhere else. People see each other every day, they become acquainted very quickly, and their affection is tinged with the sweetness and unrestraint of long-standing intimacies. We cherish in after years the dear and tender memories of those first hours of friendship, the memory of those first conversations in which a soul was unveiled, of those first glances which interrogate and respond to questions and secret thoughts which the mouth has not yet uttered, the memory of that first cordial confidence, the memory of that delightful sensation of opening our hearts to those who seem to open theirs to us in return. And the melancholy of watering places, the monotony of days that are all alike, proves hourly an incentive to this heart expansion. Well, this evening, as on every other evening, we awaited the appearance of strange faces. Only two appeared, but they were very remarkable, a man and a woman, father and daughter. They immediately reminded me of some of Edgar Poe's characters, and yet there was about them a charm, the charm associated with misfortune. I looked upon them as the victims of fate. The man was very tall and thin, rather stooped, with perfectly white hair, too white for his comparatively youthful physiognomy, and there was in his bearing and in his person that austerity peculiar to Protestants. The daughter, who was probably 24 or 25, was small in stature, and was also very thin, very pale, and she had the air of one who was worn out with utter lassitude. We meet people like this from time to time, who seem too weak for the tasks and the needs of daily life, too weak to move about, to walk, to do all that we do every day. She was rather pretty, with a transparent spiritual beauty, and she ate with extreme slowness, as if she were almost incapable of moving her arms. It must have been she, assuredly, who had come to take the waters. They sat facing me on the opposite side of the table, and I at once noticed that the father had a very singular nervous twitching. Every time he wanted to reach an object, his hand described a sort of zigzag before it succeeded in reaching what it was in search of, and after a little while this movement annoyed me so that I turned aside my head in order not to see it. I noticed, too, that the young girl during meals wore a glove on her left hand. After dinner I went for a stroll in the park of the bathing establishment. This led toward the little Auvergnat station of Chateauguay, hidden in a gorge at the foot of the high mountain, from which flowed so many boiling springs, arising from the deep bed of extinct volcanoes. Over yonder, above our heads, the domes of extinct craters lifted their ragged peaks above the rest and the long mountain chain, for Chateauguay is situated at the entrance to the land of mountain domes. Beyond it stretches out the region of peaks, and farther on again the region of precipitous summits. The Puy de Dôme is the highest of the domes, the peak of Sancy is the loftiest of the peaks, and Cantal is the most precipitous of these mountain heights. It was a very warm evening, and I was walking up and down a shady path, listening to the opening strains of the casino band, which was playing on an elevation overlooking the park. and I saw the father and the daughter advancing slowly in my direction. I bowed as one bows to one's hotel companions at a watering place, and the man coming to a sudden halt said to me, "Could you not, monsieur, tell us of a nice walk to take, short, pretty, and not steep, and pardon my troubling you?" I offered to show them the way toward the valley through which the little river flowed, and a deep valley forming a gorge between two tall, craggy, wooded slopes. They gladly accepted my offer, and we talked naturally about the virtue of the waters. "Oh," he said, "my daughter has a strange malady, the seat of which is unknown. She suffers from incomprehensible nervous attacks. At one time the doctors think she has an attack of heart disease, at another time they imagine it is some affection of the liver, and at another they declare it to be a disease of the spine. Today this protean malady, that assumes 1,000 forms and 1,000 modes of attack, is attributed to the stomach, which is the great cauldron and regulator of the body. This is why we have come here. For my part, I am rather inclined to think it is the nerves. In any case, it is very sad." Immediately the remembrance of the violent spasmodic movement of his hand came back to my mind, and I asked him, "But is this not the result of heredity? Are not your own nerves somewhat affected?" He replied calmly, "Mine? Oh, no, my nerves have always been very steady." Then suddenly, after a pause, he went on, "Ah, you are alluding to the jerking movement of my hand every time I try to reach for anything. This arises from a terrible experience which I had. Just imagine this daughter of mine was actually buried alive." I could only utter, "Ah," so great were my astonishment and emotion. He continued, "Here is the story. It is simple. Juliet had been subject for some time to serious attacks of the heart. We believed that she had disease of that organ, and were prepared for the worst. One day she was carried into the house cold, lifeless, dead. She had fallen down unconscious in the garden. The doctor certified that life was extinct. I watched by her side for a day and 2 nights. I laid her with my own hands in the coffin, which I accompanied to the cemetery, where she was deposited in the family vault. It is situated in the very heart of Lorraine. I wished to have her interred with her jewels, bracelets, necklaces, rings, all presents which she had received from me, and wearing her first ball dress. You may easily imagine my state of mind when I re-entered our home. She was the only one I had, for my wife had been dead for many years. I found my way to my own apartment in a half-distracted condition, utterly exhausted, and sank into my easy-chair without the capacity to think or the strength to move. I was nothing better now than a suffering, vibrating machine, a human being who had, as it were, been flayed alive. My soul was like an open wound. My old valet Prosper, who had assisted me in placing Juliet in her coffin, and aided me in preparing her for her last sleep, entered the room noiselessly and asked, "Does monsieur want anything?" I merely shook my head in reply. "Monsieur is wrong," he urged. "He will injure his health. Would monsieur like me to put him to bed?" I answered, "No, let me alone." And he left the room. I know not how many hours slipped away. Oh, what a night, what a night! It was cold. My fire had died out in the huge grate, and the wind, the winter wind, an icy wind, a winter hurricane blew with a regular sinister noise against the windows. How many hours slipped away? There I was without sleeping, powerless, crushed, my eyes wide open, my legs stretched out, my body limp, inanimate, and my mind torpid with despair. Suddenly the great doorbell, the great bell of the vestibule, rang out. I started so that my chair cracked under me. The solemn, ponderous sound vibrated through the empty country house as through a vault. I turned round to see what the hour was by the clock. It was just 2 a.m. Who could be coming at such an hour? And abruptly the bell again rang twice. The servants without doubt were afraid to get up. I took a wax candle and descended the stairs. I was on the point of asking, "Who is there?" Then I felt ashamed of my weakness, and I slowly drew back the heavy bolts. My heart was throbbing wildly. I was frightened. I opened the door brusquely, and in the darkness I distinguished a white figure standing erect, something that resembled an apparition. I recoiled, petrified with horror, faltering, Who are you?" A voice replied, "It is I, father." It was my daughter. I really thought I must be mad, and I retreated backward before this advancing spectre. I kept moving away, making a sign with my hand, as if to drive the phantom away, that gesture which you have noticed, that gesture which has remained with me ever since. "Do not be afraid, papa," said the apparition. "I was not dead. Somebody tried to steal my rings and cut one of my fingers. The blood began to flow, and that restored me to life." And in fact I could see that her hand was covered with blood. I fell on my knees, choking with sobs and with a rattling in my throat. Then, when I had somewhat collected my thoughts, though I was still so bewildered that I scarcely realized the awesome happiness that had befallen me, I made her go up to my room and sit down in my easy chair. Then I rang excitedly for Prosper to get him to rekindle the fire, and to bring some wine, and to summon assistance. The man entered, stared at my daughter, opened his mouth with a gasp of alarm and stupefaction, and then fell back dead. It was he who had opened the vault, who had mutilated and then abandoned my daughter, for he could not efface the traces of the theft. He had not even taken the trouble to put back the coffin into its place, feeling sure, besides, that he would not be suspected by me, as I trusted him absolutely. You see, monsieur, that we are very unfortunate people. He was silent. The night had fallen, casting its shadows over the desolate, mournful vale, and a sort of mysterious fear possessed me at finding myself by the side of those strange beings, of this young girl who had come back from the tomb, and this father with his uncanny spasm. I found it impossible to make any comment on this dreadful story. I only murmured, "What a horrible thing." Then, after a minute's silence, I added, "Let us go indoors. I think it is growing cool." And we made our way back to the hotel. A mother of monsters. I recalled this horrible story, the events of which occurred long ago, and this horrible woman the other day at a fashionable seaside resort, where I saw on the beach a well-known, young, elegant, and charming Parisienne, adored and respected by everyone. I had been invited by a friend to pay him a visit in a little provincial town. He took me about in all directions to do the honors of the place, showed me noted scenes, chateaux, industries, ruins. He pointed out monuments, churches, old carved doorways, enormous or distorted trees, the oak of St. Andrew, and the yew tree of Roquebois. When I had exhausted my admiration and enthusiasm over all the sights, my friend said with a distressed expression on his face that there was nothing left to look at. I breathed freely. I would now be able to rest under the shade of the trees. But all at once he uttered an exclamation. "Oh yes, we have the Mother of Monsters. I must take you to see her." "Who is that, the Mother of Monsters?" I asked. "She is an abominable woman," he replied. "A regular demon, a being who voluntarily brings into the world deformed, hideous, frightful children, monstrosities, in fact, and then sells them to showmen who exhibit such things. These exploiters of freaks come from time to find out if she has any fresh monstrosity, and if it meets with their approval, they carry it away with them, paying the mother a compensation. She has 11 of this description. She is rich. You think I am joking, romancing, exaggerating. No, my friend, I am telling you the truth, the exact truth. Let us go and see this woman, then I will tell you her history." He took me into one of the suburbs. The woman lived in a pretty little house by the side of the road. It was attractive and well kept. The garden was filled with fragrant flowers. One might have supposed it to be the residence of a retired lawyer. A maid ushered us into a sort of little country parlor, and the wretch appeared. She was about 40. She was a tall, big woman with hard features, but well-formed, vigorous and healthy, the true type of a robust peasant woman, half animal and half woman. She was aware of her reputation, and received everyone with a humility that smacked of hatred. "What do the gentlemen wish?" she asked. "They tell me that your last child is just like an ordinary child, that he does not resemble his brothers at all," replied my friend. "I wanted to be sure of that. Is it true?" She cast on us a malicious and furious look as she said, Oh no, my poor sir. He is perhaps even uglier than the rest. I have no luck. They are all like that. It is heartbreaking. How can the good God be so hard on a poor woman who is all alone in the world? How can he?" She spoke hurriedly, her eyes cast down, with the deprecating airs of a wild beast who is afraid. Her harsh voice became soft, and it seemed strange to hear those tearful falsetto tones issuing from that big, bony frame, of unusual strength and with coarse outlines, which seemed fitted for violent action, and made to utter howls like a wolf. "We should like to see your little one," said my friend. I fancied she coloured up. I may have been deceived. After a few moments of silence, she said in a louder tone, "What good would that do you?" "Why do you not wish to show it to us?" replied my friend. "There are many people to whom you will show it. You know whom I mean." She gave a start, and resuming her natural voice, and giving free play to her anger, she screamed, "Was that why you came here? To insult me? Because my children are like animals, tell me? You shall not see him. No, you shall not see him. Go away. I do not know why you all try to torment me like that." She walked over toward us, her hands on her hips. At the brutal tone of her voice, a sort of moaning, or rather a mewing, the lamentable cry of an idiot, came from the adjoining room. I shivered to the marrow of my bones. We retreated before her. "Take care, devil," They called her the devil, said my friend. Take care. Some day you will get yourself into trouble through this. She began to tremble, beside herself with fury, shaking her fist and roaring. Be off with you! What will get me to trouble? Be off with you, miscreants! She was about to attack us, but we fled, saddened at what we had seen. When we got outside, my friend said, Well, you have seen her. What do you think of her? Tell me the story of this brute, I replied. And this is what he told me as we walked along the white high road, with ripe crops on either side of it which rippled like the sea in the light breeze that passed over them. This woman was once a servant on a farm. She was an honest girl, steady and economical. She was never known to have an admirer, and never suspected of any frailty, but she went astray, as so many do. She soon found herself in trouble, and was tortured with fear and shame. Wishing to conceal her misfortune, she bound her body tightly with a corset of her own invention, made of boards and cord. The more she developed, the more she bound herself with this instrument of torture, suffering martyrdom, but brave in her sorrow, not allowing anyone to see or suspect anything. She maimed the little unborn being, cramping it with that frightful corset, and made a monster of it. Its head was squeezed and elongated to a point, and its large eyes seemed popping out of its head. Its limbs, exaggeratedly long, and twisted like the stalk of a vine, terminated in fingers like the claws of a spider. Its trunk was tiny and round as a nut. The child was born in an open field, and when the weeders saw it, they fled away screaming, and the report spread that she had given birth to a demon. From that time on, she was called the Devil. She was driven from the farm and lived on charity under a cloud. She brought up the monster, whom she hated with a savage hatred, and would have strangled, perhaps, if the priest had not threatened her with arrest. One day some traveling showmen heard about the frightful creature and asked to see it, so that if it pleased them they might take it away. They were pleased, and counted out 500 francs to the mother. At first she had refused to let them see the little animal, as she was ashamed, but when she discovered it had a monetary value, and that these people were anxious to get it, she began to haggle with them, raising her price with all a peasant's persistence. She made them draw up a paper in which they promised to pay her 400 francs a year besides, as though they had taken this deformity into their employ. Incited by the greed of gain, she continued to produce these phenomena, so as to have an assured income like a bourgeoisie. Some of them were long, some short, some like crabs, all bodies, others like lizards. Several died, and she was heartbroken. The law tried to interfere, but as they had no proof, they let her continue to produce her freaks. She has at this moment 11 alive, and they bring in, on an average, counting good and bad years, from 5,000 to 6,000 francs a year. One alone is not placed, the one she was unwilling to show us. But she will not keep it for long, for she is known to all the showmen in the world who come from time to time to see if she has anything new. She even gets bids from them when the monster is valuable. My friend was silent. A profound disgust stirred my heart, and a feeling of rage, of regret, to think that I had not strangled this brute when I had the opportunity. I had forgotten this story when I saw on the beach of a fashionable resort the other day an elegant, charming, dainty woman, surrounded by men who paid her respect as well as admiration. I was walking along the beach, arm in arm with a friend, the resident physician. 10 minutes later I saw a nursemaid with 3 children who were rolling in the sand. A pair of little crutches lay on the ground, and touched my sympathy. I then noticed that these 3 children were all deformed, humpbacked, or crooked, and hideous. "Those are the offspring of that charming woman you saw just now," said the doctor. I was filled with pity for her as well for them, and exclaimed, "Oh, the poor mother! How could she ever laugh?" "Do not pity her, my friend. Pity the poor children," replied the doctor. "This is the consequence of preserving a slender figure up to the last. These little deformities were made by the corset. She knows very well that she is risking her life at this game. But what does she care, as long as she can be beautiful and have admirers?" And then I recalled that other woman, the peasant, the devil, who sold her children, her monsters. The Hand. All were crowding around Bermutier, the judge, who was giving his opinion about the St. Cloud mystery. For a month this inexplicable crime had been the talk of Paris. Nobody could make head or tail of it. Bermutier, standing with his back to the fireplace, was talking, citing the evidence, discussing the various theories, but arriving at no conclusion. Some women had risen in order to get nearer to him, and were standing with their eyes fastened on the clean-shaven face of the judge, who was saying such weighty things. They were shaking and trembling, moved by fear and curiosity, and by the eager and insatiable desire for the horrible, which haunts the soul of every woman. One of them, paler than the others, said during a pause, "It's terrible. It verges on the supernatural. The truth will never be known." The judge turned to her. "True, madam, it is likely that the actual facts will never be discovered. As for the word supernatural which you have just used, it has nothing to do with the matter. We are in the presence of a very cleverly conceived and executed crime, so well enshrouded in mystery that we cannot disentangle it from the involved circumstances which surround it. But once I had to take charge of an affair in which the uncanny seemed to play a part. In fact, the case became so confused that it had to be given up." Several women exclaimed at once. "Oh, tell us about it!" And Bermutier smiled in a dignified manner, as a judge should, and went on. "Do not think, however, that I for 1 minute ascribed anything in the case to supernatural influences. I believe only in normal causes. But if, instead of using the word supernatural to express what we do not understand, we were simply to make use of the word inexplicable, it would be much better. At any rate, in the affair of which I am about to tell you, it is especially the surrounding preliminary circumstances which impressed me. Here are the facts. I was at that time a judge at Ajaccio, a little white city on the edge of a bay which is surrounded by high mountains. The majority of the cases which came up before me concerned vendettas. There are some that are superb, dramatic, ferocious, heroic. We find there the most beautiful causes for revenge of which one could dream. Enmities hundreds of years old, quieted for a time but never extinguished. Abominable stratagems, murders becoming massacres and almost deeds of glory. For 2 years I heard of nothing but the price of blood, of this terrible Corsican prejudice which compels revenge for insults meted out to the offending person and all his descendants and relatives. I had seen old men, children, cousins murdered. My head was full of these stories. One day I learned that an Englishman who had just hired a little villa at the end of the bay for several years, he had brought with him a French servant whom he had engaged on the way at Marseille. Soon this peculiar person, living alone, only going out to hunt and fish, aroused a widespread interest. He never spoke to anyone, never went to the town, and every morning he would practice for an hour or so with his revolver and rifle. Legends were built up around him. It was said that he was some high personage, fleeing from his fatherland for political reasons. Then it was affirmed that he was in hiding after having committed some abominable crime. Some particularly horrible circumstances were even mentioned. In my judicial position, I thought it necessary to get some information about this man, but it was impossible to learn anything. He called himself Sir John Rowell. I therefore had to be satisfied with watching him as closely as I could, but I could see nothing suspicious about his actions. However, as rumors about him were growing and becoming more widespread, I decided to try to see this stranger myself, and I began to hunt regularly in the neighborhood of his grounds. For a long time I watched without finding an opportunity. At last it came to me in the shape of a partridge, which I shot and killed right in front of the Englishman. My dog fetched it for me, but taking the bird, I went at once to Sir John Rowell, and, begging his pardon, asked him to accept it. He was a big man with red hair and beard, very tall, very broad, a kind of calm and polite Hercules. He had nothing of the so-called British stiffness, and in a broad English accent he thanked me warmly for my attention. At the end of a month we had 5 or 6 conversations. One night at last, as I was passing before his door, I saw him in the garden, seated astride a chair, smoking his pipe. I bowed, and he invited me to come in and have a glass of beer. I needed no urging. He received me with the most punctilious English courtesy, sang the praises of France and of Corsica, and declared that he was quite in love with this country. Then, with great caution and under the guise of a vivid interest, I asked him a few questions about his life and his plans. He answered without embarrassment, telling me that he had traveled a great deal in Africa, in the Indies, and in America. He added, laughing, "I have had many adventures." Then I turned the conversation on hunting, and he gave me the most curious details on hunting the hippopotamus, the tiger, the elephant, and even the gorilla. I said, "Are all these animals dangerous?" He smiled. "Oh no, man is the worst." And he laughed a good broad laugh, the wholesome laugh of a contented Englishman. "I have also frequently been man-hunting." Then he began to talk about weapons, and he invited me to come in and see different makes of guns. His parlor was draped in black silk embroidered in gold. Big yellow flowers, as brilliant as fire, were worked on the dark material. He said, "It is a Japanese material." But in the middle of the widest panel, a strange thing attracted my attention. A black object stood out against a square of red velvet. I went up to it. It was a hand, a human hand, not the clean white hand of a skeleton, but a dried black hand with yellow nails, the muscles exposed and traces of old blood on the bones, which were cut off as clean as though it had been chopped off with an axe near the middle of the forearm. Around the wrist, an enormous iron chain, riveted and soldered to this unclean member, fastened it to the wall by a ring, strong enough to hold an elephant in leash. I asked, "What is that?" The Englishman answered quietly, "That is my best enemy. It comes from America, too. The bones were severed by a sword and the skin cut off with a sharp stone and dried in the sun for a week." I touched these human remains, which must have belonged to a giant. The uncommonly long fingers were attached by enormous tendons, which still had pieces of skin hanging to them in places. This hand was terrible to see. It made one think of some savage vengeance. I said, "This man must have been very strong." The Englishman answered quietly, "Yes, but I was stronger than he. I put on this chain to hold him." I thought he was joking. I said, "This chain is useless now. The hand won't run away." Sir John Rowell answered seriously, "It always wants to go away. This chain is needed." I glanced at him quickly, questioning his face, and I asked myself, is he an insane man or a practical joker? But his face remained inscrutable, calm and friendly. I turned to other subjects and admired his rifles. However, I noticed that he kept 3 loaded revolvers in the room, as though constantly in fear of some attack. I paid him several calls, then I did not go any more. People had become used to his presence. Everybody had lost interest in him. A whole year rolled by. One morning, toward the end of November, my servant awoke and announced that Sir John Rowell had been murdered during the night. Half an hour later, I entered the Englishman's house, together with the police commissioner and the captain of the gendarmes. The servant, bewildered and in despair, was crying before the door. At first I suspected this man, but he was innocent. The guilty party could never be found. On entering Sir John's parlor, I noticed the body, stretched out on its back in the middle of the room. His vest was torn, the sleeve of his jacket had been pulled off. Everything pointed to a violent struggle. The Englishman had been strangled. His face was black, swollen, and frightful, and seemed to express a terrible fear. He held something between his teeth, and his neck, pierced by 5 or 6 holes which looked as though they had been made by some iron instrument, was covered with blood. A physician joined us. He examined the finger marks on the neck for a long time, and then made this strange announcement. "It looks as though he'd been strangled by a skeleton." A cold chill seemed to run down my back, and I looked over to where I had formerly seen the terrible hand. It was no longer there. The chain was hanging down, broken. I bent over the dead man, and in his contracted mouth I found one of the fingers of this vanished hand, cut, or rather sawed off by the teeth down to the second knuckle. Then the investigation began. Nothing could be discovered. No door, window, or piece of furniture had been forced. The 2 watchdogs had not been aroused from their sleep. Here, in a few words, is the testimony of the servant. For a month his master had seemed excited. He had received many letters, which he would immediately burn. Often in a fit of passion which approached madness, he had taken a switch and struck wildly at this dried hand riveted to the wall, and which had disappeared, no one knows how, at the very hour of the crime. He would go to bed very late and carefully lock himself in. He always kept weapons within reach. Often at night he would talk loudly as though he were quarreling with someone. That night somehow he had made no noise, and it was only on going to open the windows that the servant had found Sir John murdered. He suspected no one. I communicated what I knew of the dead man to the judges and public officials. Throughout the whole island a minute investigation was carried on. Nothing could be found out. One night, about 3 months after the crime, I had a terrible nightmare. I seemed to see the horrible hand running over my curtains and walls like an immense scorpion or spider. 3 times I awoke. 3 times I went to sleep again. 3 times I saw the hideous object galloping round my room and moving its fingers like legs. The following day the hand was brought me, bound in the cemetery on the grave of Sir John Rowell, who had been buried there because we had been unable to find his family. The first finger was missing. Ladies, there is my story. I know nothing more. The women, deeply stirred, were pale and trembling. One of them exclaimed, "But that is neither a climax nor an explanation. We will be unable to sleep unless you give us your opinion of what had occurred." The judge smiled severely. "Oh, ladies, I shall certainly spoil your terrible dreams. I simply believe that the legitimate owner of the hand was not dead, that he came to get it with his remaining one. But I don't know how. It was a kind of vendetta." One of the women murmured, "No, it can't be that." And the judge, still smiling, said, "Didn't I tell you that my explanation would not satisfy you?" The Flayed Hand. One evening about 8 months ago, I met with some college comrades at the lodgings of our friend Louis R. We drank punch and smoked, talked of literature and art, and made jokes like any other company of young men. Suddenly the door flew open, and one who had been my friend since boyhood burst in like a hurricane. "Guess where I come from," he cried. "I bet on the Mabee," responded one. "No," said another. "You are too gay. You come from borrowing money, from burying a rich uncle, or from pawning your watch." "You are getting sober," cried a third. "And as you scented the punch in Louis's room, you came up here to get drunk again." "You are all wrong," he replied. "I come from P in Normandy, where I have spent 8 days, and whence I have brought one of my friends, a great criminal whom I ask permission to present to you." With these words he drew from his pocket a long black hand, from which the skin had been stripped. It had been severed at the wrist. Its dry and shriveled shape, and the narrow yellowed nails still clinging to the fingers, made it frightful to look upon. The muscles, which showed that its first owner had been possessed of great strength, were bound in place by a strip of parchment-like skin. "Just fancy," said my friend. "The other day they sold the effects of an old sorcerer, recently deceased, well known in all the country. Every Saturday night he used to go to witch gatherings on a broomstick. He practiced the white magic and the black, gave blue milk to the cows, and made them wear tails like that of the companion of St. Anthony. The old scoundrel always had a deep affection for this hand, which he said was that of a celebrated criminal, executed in 1736 for having thrown his lawful wife head first into a well, for which I do not blame him, and then hanging in the belfry the priest who had married him. After this double exploit he went away, and during his subsequent career, which was brief but exciting, he robbed 12 travelers, smoked a score of monks in their monastery, and made a seraglio of a convent." "But what are you going to do with this horror?" we cried. "Eh, parbleu, I will make it the handle to my doorbell and frighten my creditors." "My friend," said Henry Smith, a big, phlegmatic Englishman, "I believe that this hand is only a kind of Indian meat, preserved by a new process. I advise you to make bouillon of it." "Réellement, messieurs," said with the utmost sang-froid a medical student who was 3/4 drunk. "But if you followed my advice, Pierre, you will give this piece of human debris Christian burial, for fear lest its owner should come to demand it. Then, too, this hand has acquired some bad habits, for you know the proverb, 'Who has killed will kill.'" "And who has drank will drink," replied the host as he poured out a big glass of punch for the student, who emptied it at a draught and slid dead drunk onto the table. His sudden dropping out of the company was greeted with a burst of laughter, and Pierre, raising his glass and saluting the hand, cried, "I drink to the next visit of thy master." Then the conversation turned upon other subjects, and shortly afterward each returned to his lodgings. About 2 o'clock the next day, as I was passing Pierre's door, I entered and found him reading and smoking. "Well, how goes it?" said I. "Very well," he responded. "And your hand?" "My hand? Did you not see it on the bell-pull? I put it there when I returned home last night. But apropos of this, what do you think? Some idiot, doubtless to play a stupid joke on me, came ringing at my door towards midnight. I demanded who was there, but as no one replied, I went back to bed again and to sleep." At this moment the door opened, and the landlord, a fat and extremely impertinent person, entered without saluting us. "Sir," said he, "I pray you to take away immediately that carrion which you have hung to your bell-pull. Unless you do this, I shall be compelled to ask you to leave." "Sir," responded Pierre with much gravity, "you insult a hand which does not merit it. Know you that it belonged to a man of high breeding?" The landlord turned on his heel and made his exit without speaking. Pierre followed him, detached the hand, and affixed it to the bell-cord hanging in his alcove. "That is better," he said. "This hand, like the brother all must die of the Trappists, will give my thoughts a serious turn every night before I sleep." At the end of an hour I left him and returned to my own apartment. I slept badly the following night, was nervous and agitated, and several times awoke with a start. Once I imagined even that a man had broken into my room, and I sprang up and searched the closets and under the bed. Towards 6 o'clock in the morning I was commencing to doze at last, when a loud knocking at my door made me jump from my couch. It was my friend Pierre's servant, half-dressed, pale and trembling. "Ah, sir," cried he, sobbing, "my poor master! Someone has murdered him!" I dressed myself hastily and ran to Pierre's lodgings. The house was full of people disputing together, and everything was in a commotion. Everyone was talking at the same time, recounting and commenting on the occurrence in all sorts of ways. With great difficulty I reached the bedroom, made myself known to those guarding the door, and was permitted to enter. 4 agents of police were standing in the middle of the apartment, pencils in hand, examining every detail, conferring in low voices and writing from time to time in their notebooks. 2 doctors were in consultation by the bed on which lay the unconscious form of Pierre. He was not dead, but his face was fixed in an expression of the most awful terror. His eyes were open their widest, and the dilated pupils seemed to regard fixedly with unspeakable horror something unknown and frightful. His hands were clenched. I raised the quilt which covered his body from the chin downward, and saw on his neck, deeply sunk in the flesh, the marks of fingers. Some drops of blood spotted his shirt. At that moment one thing struck me. I chanced to notice that the shriveled hand was no longer attached to the bell cord. The doctors had doubtless removed it to avoid the comments of those entering the chamber where the wounded man lay, because the appearance of this hand was indeed frightful. I did not inquire what had become of it. I now clip from a newspaper of the next day the story of the crime with all the details that the police were able to procure. A frightful attempt was made yesterday on the life of young Monsieur Pierre B., student who belongs to one of the best families in Normandy. He returned home about 10 o'clock in the evening and excused his valet, Bovine, from further attendance upon him, saying that he felt fatigued and was going to bed. Towards midnight, Bovine was suddenly awakened by the furious ringing of his master's bell. He was afraid and lighted a lamp and waited. The bell was silent about a minute, then rang again with such vehemence that the domestic, mad with fright, flew from his room to awaken the concierge, who ran to summon the police, and at the end of about 15 minutes, 2 policemen forced open the door. A horrible sight met their eyes. The furniture was overturned, giving evidence of a fearful struggle between the victim and his assailant. In the middle of the room, upon his back, his body rigid, with livid face and frightfully dilated eyes, lay motionless young Pierre B., bearing upon his neck the deep imprints of 5 fingers. Dr. Bourdain was called immediately, and his report says that the aggressor must have been possessed of prodigious strength and have had an extraordinarily thin and sinewy hand, because the fingers left in the flesh of the victim 5 holes, like those from a pistol ball, and had penetrated until they almost met. There is no clue to the motive of the crime or to its perpetrator. The police are making a thorough investigation. The following appeared in the same newspaper next day. Monsieur Pierre B., the victim of the frightful assault of which we published an account yesterday, has regained consciousness after 2 hours of the most assiduous care by Dr. Bourdain. His life is not in danger, but it is strongly feared that he has lost his reason. No trace has been found of his assailant. My poor friend was indeed insane. For 7 months I visited him daily at the hospital where we had placed him, but he did not recover the light of reason. In his delirium strange words escaped him, and like all madmen, he had one fixed idea. He believed himself continually pursued by a spectre. One day they came for me in haste, saying he was worse, and when I arrived I found him dying. For 2 hours he remained very calm, then suddenly rising from his bed in spite of our efforts, he cried, waving his arms as if a prey to the most awful terror, "Take it away! Take it away! It strangles me! Help! Help!" Twice he made the circuit of the room, uttering horrible screams, then fell face downward, dead. As he was an orphan, I was charged to take his body to the little village of P in Normandy, where his parents were buried. It was the place from which he had arrived the evening he found us drinking punch in Louis R's room, when he had presented to us the Flayed Hand. His body was enclosed in a leaden coffin, and 4 days afterwards I walked sadly beside the old curé who had given him his first lessons to the little cemetery where they dug his grave. It was a beautiful day, and sunshine from a cloudless sky flooded the earth. Birds sang from the blackberry bushes where many a time when we were children we had stolen to eat the fruit. Again I saw Pierre and myself creeping along behind the hedge and slipping through the gap that we knew so well, down at the end of the little plot where they bury the poor. Again we would return to the house with cheeks and lips black with the juice of the berries we had eaten. I looked at the bushes. They were covered with fruit. Mechanically I picked some and bore it to my mouth. The curé had opened his breviary and was muttering his prayers in a low voice. I heard at the end of the walk the spades of the grave diggers who were opening the tomb. Suddenly they called out. The curé closed his book, and we went to see what they wished of us. They had found a coffin, and digging a stroke of the pickaxe had started the cover, and we perceived within a skeleton of unusual stature, lying on its back, its hollow eyes seeming yet to menace and defy us. I was troubled, I know not why, and almost afraid. "Hold!" cried one of the men. "Look there! One of the rascal's hands has been severed at the wrist. Ah, here it is!" And he picked up from beside the body a huge withered hand and held it out to us. "See!" cried the other, laughing. "See how he glares at you, as if he would spring at your throat to make you give him back his hand." "Go," said the curé. "Leave the dead in peace and close the coffin. We will make poor Pierre's grave elsewhere. The next day all was finished, and I returned to Paris after having left 50 francs with the old curé for masses, to be said for the repose of the soul of him whose sepulchre we had troubled. The terror. You say you cannot possibly understand it, and I believe you. You think I am losing my mind? Perhaps I am, but for other reasons than those you imagine, my dear friend. Yes, I am going to be married, and will tell you what has led me to take that step. I may add that I know very little of the girl who is going to become my wife tomorrow. I have only seen her 4 or 5 times. I know that there is nothing unpleasing about her, and that is enough for my purpose. She is small, fair, and stout, so of course the day after tomorrow I shall ardently wish for a tall, dark, thin woman. She is not rich, and belongs to the middle classes. She is a girl such as you may find by the gross, well adapted for matrimony, without any apparent faults, and with no particularly striking qualities. People say of her, "Miss Lejeune is a very nice girl." Tomorrow they will say, "What a very nice woman Madame Raymond is." She belongs, in a word, to that immense number of girls whom one is glad to have for one's wife, till the moment comes when one discovers that one happens to prefer all other women to that particular woman whom one has married. Well, you will say to me, what on earth did you get married for? I hardly like to tell you the strange and seemingly improbable reason that urged me on to this senseless act. The fact, however, is that I am afraid of being alone. I don't know how to tell you or to make you understand me, but my state of mind is so wretched that you will pity me and despise me. I do not want to be alone any longer at night. I want to feel that there is someone close to me, touching me, a being who could speak and say something, no matter what it be. I wish to be able to awaken somebody by my side, so that I may be able to ask some sudden question, a stupid question, even if I feel inclined, so that I may hear a human voice and feel that there is some waking soul close to me, someone whose reason is at work, so that when I hastily light the candle I may see some human face by my side, because, I am ashamed to confess it, because I am afraid of being alone. Oh, you don't understand me yet. I am not afraid of any danger. If a man were to come into the room, I should kill him without trembling. I am not afraid of ghosts, nor do I believe in the supernatural. I am not afraid of dead people, for I believe in the total annihilation of every being that disappears from the face of this earth. Well, yes, it must be told I am afraid of myself, afraid of that horrible sensation of incomprehensible fear. You may laugh if you like. It is terrible, and I cannot get over it. I am afraid of the walls, of the furniture, of the familiar objects which are animated, as far as I am concerned, by a kind of animal life. Above all, I am afraid of my own dreadful thoughts, of my reason, which seems as if it were about to leave me, driven away by a mysterious and invisible agony. At first I feel a vague uneasiness in my mind, which causes a cold shiver to run all over me. I look round, and of course nothing is to be seen, and I wish that there was something there, no matter what, as long as it was something tangible. I am frightened merely because I cannot understand my own terror. If I speak, I am afraid of my own voice. If I walk, I am afraid of I know not what, behind the door, behind the curtains, in the cupboard, or under my bed. And yet all the time I know there is nothing anywhere, and I turn round suddenly because I am afraid of what is behind me, although there is nothing there, and I know it. I become agitated. I feel that my fear increases, and so I shut myself up in my own room, get into bed, and hide under the clothes, and there, cowering down, rolled into a ball, I close my eyes in despair, and remain thus for an indefinite time, remembering that my candle is alight on the table by my bedside, and that I ought to put it out, and yet I dare not do it. It is very terrible, is it not, to be like that? Formerly I felt nothing of all that. I came home quite calm and went up and down my apartment without anything disturbing my peace of mind. Had any one told me that I should be attacked by a malady, for I can call it nothing else, of most improbable fear, such a stupid and terrible malady as it is, I should have laughed outright. I was certainly never afraid of opening the door in the dark. I went to bed slowly without locking it, and never got up in the middle of the night to make sure that everything was firmly closed. It began last year in a very strange manner on a damp autumn evening. When my servant had left the room after I had dined, I asked myself what I was going to do. I walked up and down my room for some time, feeling tired without any reason for it, unable to work, and even without energy to read. A fine rain was falling, and I felt unhappy, a prey to one of those fits of despondency without any apparent cause, which make us feel inclined to cry or to talk, no matter to whom, so as to shake off our depressing thoughts. I felt that I was alone, and my rooms seemed to me to be more empty than they had ever been before. I was in the midst of infinite and overwhelming solitude. What was I to do? I sat down, but a kind of nervous impatience seemed to affect my legs, so I got up and began to walk about again. I was perhaps rather feverish, for my hands, which I had clasped behind me, as one often does when walking slowly, almost seemed to burn one another. Then suddenly a cold shiver ran down my back, and I thought the damp air might have penetrated into my rooms, so I lit the fire for the first time that year, and sat down again and looked at the flames. But soon I felt that I could not possibly remain quiet, and so I got up again and determined to go out, to pull myself together, and to find a friend to bear me company. I could not find anyone, so I walked to the boulevard to try and meet some acquaintance or other there. It was wretched everywhere, and the wet pavement glistened in the gaslight, while the oppressive warmth of the almost impalpable rain lay heavily over the streets and seemed to obscure the light of the lamps. I went on slowly, saying to myself, I shall not find a soul to talk to. I glanced into several cafes, from the Madeleine as far as the Faubourg Poissonniere, and saw many unhappy-looking individuals sitting at the tables who did not seem to even have enough energy left to finish the refreshments they had ordered. For a long time I wandered aimlessly up and down, and about midnight I started for home. I was very calm and very tired. My janitor opened the door at once, which was quite unusual for him, and I thought that another lodger had probably just come in. When I go out I always double-lock the door of my room, and I found it merely closed, which surprised me, but I suppose that some letters had been brought up for me in the course of the evening. I went in and found my fire still burning, so that it lighted up the room a little, and while in the act of taking up a candle, I noticed somebody sitting in my armchair by the fire, warming his feet with his back toward me. I was not in the slightest degree frightened. I thought very naturally that some friend or other had come to see me. No doubt the porter, to whom I had said I was going out, had lent him his own key. In a moment I remembered all the circumstances of my return, how the street door had been opened immediately, and that my own door was only latched and not locked. I could see nothing of my friend but his head, and he had evidently gone to sleep while waiting for me. So I went up to him to rouse him. I saw him quite distinctly. His right arm was hanging down and his legs were crossed. The position of his head, which was somewhat inclined to the left of the armchair, seemed to indicate that he was asleep. Who can it be? I asked myself. I could not see clearly as the room was rather dark, so I put up my hand to touch him on the shoulder, and it came into contact with the back of the chair. There was nobody there. The seat was empty. I fairly jumped with fright. For a moment I drew back as if confronted by some terrible danger. Then I turned round again, impelled by an imperious standing upright, panting with fear, so upset that I could not collect my thoughts and ready to faint. But I am a cool man, and soon recovered myself. I thought, it is a mere hallucination, that is all. And I immediately began to reflect on this phenomenon. Thoughts fly quickly at such moments. I had been suffering from a hallucination. That was an incontestable fact. My mind had been perfectly lucid and had acted regularly and logically. So there was nothing the matter with the brain. It was only my eyes that had been deceived. They had had a vision, one of those visions which lead simple folk to believe in miracles. It was a nervous seizure of the optical apparatus, nothing more. The eyes were rather congested, perhaps. I lit my candle, and when I stooped down to the fire, in doing so I noticed that I was trembling, and I raised myself up with a jump, as if somebody had touched me from behind. I was certainly not by any means calm. I walked up and down a little, and hummed a tune or two. Then I double-locked the door and felt rather reassured. Now, at any rate, nobody could come in. I sat down again and thought over my adventure for a long time. Then I went to bed and blew out my light. For some minutes all went well. I lay quietly on my back, but presently an irresistible desire seized me to look around the room, and I turned over on my side. My fire was nearly out, and the few glowing embers threw a faint light on the floor by the chair where I fancied I saw the man sitting again. I quickly struck a match, but I had been mistaken. There was nothing there. I got up, however, and hid the chair behind my bed, and tried to get to sleep, as the room was now dark, but I had not forgotten myself for more than 5 minutes, when in my dream I saw all the scene which I had previously witnessed as clearly as if it were reality. I woke up with a start, and having lit the candle, sat up in bed without venturing even to try to go to sleep again. Twice, however, sleep overcame me for a few moments in spite of myself, and twice I saw the same thing again, till I fancied I was going mad. When day broke, however, I thought that I was cured, and slept peacefully until noon. It was all past and over. I had been feverish, had had the nightmare. I know not what. I had been ill, in fact, but yet thought I was a great fool. I enjoyed myself thoroughly that evening. I dined at a restaurant and afterward went to the theater and then started for home. But as I got near the house, I was once more seized by a strange feeling of uneasiness. I was afraid of seeing him again. I was not afraid of him, not afraid of his presence, in which I did not believe, but I was afraid of being deceived again. I was afraid of some fresh hallucination, afraid lest fear should take possession of me. For more than an hour I wandered up and down the pavement. Then, feeling that I was really too foolish, I returned home. I breathed so hard that I could hardly get upstairs, and remained standing outside my door for more than 10 minutes. Then suddenly I had a courageous impulse, and my will asserted itself. I inserted my key into the lock, and went into the apartment with a candle in my hand. I kicked open my bedroom door, which was partially open, and cast a frightened glance toward the fireplace. There was nothing there. Ah, what a relief and what a delight! What a deliverance! I walked up and down briskly and boldly, but I was not altogether reassured, and kept turning round with a jump. The very shadows in the corners disquieted me. I slept badly and was constantly disturbed by imaginary noises, but did not see him. No, that was all over. Since that time I've been afraid of being alone at night. I feel that the spectre is there, close to me, around me, but it has not appeared to me again. And supposing it did, what would it matter, since I do not believe in it and know that it is nothing? However, it still worries me because I am constantly thinking of it, his right arm hanging down, and his head inclined to the left like a man who is asleep. I don't want to think about it. Why, however, am I so persistently possessed with this idea? His feet were close to the fire. He haunts me. It is very stupid, but who and what is he? I know that he does not exist except in my cowardly imagination, in my fears, and in my agony. There, enough of that. Yes, it is all very well for me to reason with myself, to stiffen my backbone, so to say, but I cannot remain at home because I know he is there. I know I shall not see him again. He will not show himself again. That is all over. But he is there all the same in my thoughts. He remains invisible, but that does not prevent his being there. He is behind the doors, in the closed cupboard, in the wardrobe, under the bed, in every dark corner. If I open the door of the cupboard, if I take the candle to look under the bed and throw a light on the dark places, he is there no longer, but I feel that he is behind me. I turn round, certain that I shall not see him, that I shall never see him again, but for all that, he is behind me. It is very stupid, it is dreadful, but what am I to do? I cannot help it. But if there were two of us in the place, I feel certain that he would not be there any longer, for he is there just because I am alone, simply and solely because I am alone. The Apparition. The subject of sequestration of the person came up in speaking of a recent lawsuit, and each of us had a story to tell, a true story, he said. We had been spending the evening together at an old family mansion in the Rue de Grenelle, just a party of intimate friends. The old Marquis de la Tour Samuel, who was 82, rose and, leaning his elbow on the mantelpiece, said in his somewhat shaky voice, "I also knew of something strange, so strange that it has haunted me all my life. It is now 56 years since the incident occurred, and yet not a month passes that I do not see it again in a dream, so great is the impression of fear it has left on my mind. For 10 minutes I experienced such horrible fright that ever since then a sort of constant terror has remained with me. Sudden noises startle me violently, and objects imperfectly distinguished at night inspire me with a mad desire to flee from them. In short, I am afraid of the dark. But I would not have acknowledged that before I reached my present age. Now I can say anything. I have never receded before real danger, ladies. It is therefore permissible at 82 years of age not to be brave in presence of imaginary danger. That affair so completely upset me, caused me such deep and mysterious and terrible distress, that I never spoke of it to anyone. I will now tell it to you exactly as it happened, without any attempt at explanation. In July 1827, I was stationed at Rouen. One day as I was walking along the quay, I met a man whom I thought I recognized without being able to recall exactly who he was. Instinctively, I made a movement to stop. The stranger perceived it and at once extended his hand. He was a friend to whom I had been deeply attached as a youth. For 5 years I had not seen him. He seemed to have aged half a century. His hair was quite white, and he walked bent over as though completely exhausted. He apparently understood my surprise, and he told me of the misfortune which had shattered his life. Having fallen madly in love with a young girl, he had married her, but after a year of more than earthly happiness, she died suddenly of an affectation of the heart.
He left his country home on the very day of her burial and came to his townhouse in Rouen, where he lived alone and unhappy, so sad and wretched that he thought constantly of suicide. "Since I have found you again in this manner," he said, "I will ask you to render me an important service. It is to go and get me out of the desk in my bedroom, our bedroom, some papers of which I have urgent need. I cannot send a servant or a business clerk, as discretion and absolute silence are necessary. As for myself, nothing on earth would ever induce me to re-enter that house. I will give you the key of the room, which I myself locked on leaving, and the key of my desk, and also a few words from my gardener telling him to open the chateau for you. But come and breakfast with me tomorrow, and we will arrange all that." I promised to do him the slight favor he asked. It was, for that matter, only a ride which I could make in an hour on horseback, his property being but a few miles distant from Rouen. At 10 o'clock the following day I breakfasted tete-a-tete with my friend, but he scarcely spoke. He begged me to pardon him. The thought of the visit I was about to make to that room, the scene of his dead happiness, overcame him, he said. He indeed seemed singularly agitated and preoccupied, as though undergoing some mysterious mental struggle. At length he explained to me exactly what I had to do. It was very simple. I must take 2 packages of letters and a roll of papers from the first right-hand drawer of the desk, of which I had the key. He added, "I need not beg you to refrain from glancing at them." I was wounded at that remark and told him so somewhat sharply. He stammered, "Forgive me, I suffer so," and tears came to his eyes. At about 1 o'clock I took leave of him to accomplish my mission. The weather was glorious, and I trotted across the fields, listening to the song of the larks and the rhythmical clang of my sword against my boot. Then I entered the forest and walked my horse. Branches of trees caressed my face as I passed, and now and then I caught a leaf with my teeth and chewed it, from sheer gladness of heart at being alive and vigorous on such a radiant day. As I approached the chateau, I took from my pocket the letter I had for the gardener, and was astonished at finding it sealed. I was so irritated that I was about to turn back without having fulfilled my promise, but reflected that I should thereby display undue susceptibility. My friend in his troubled condition might easily have fastened the envelope without noticing that he did so. The manor looked as if it had been abandoned for 20 years. The open gate was falling from its hinges. The walks were overgrown with grass, and the flower beds were no longer distinguishable. The noise I made by kicking at a shutter brought out an old man from a side door. He seemed stunned with astonishment at seeing me. On receiving my letter, he read it, reread it, turned it over and over, looked me up and down, put the paper in his pocket, and finally said, "Well, what is it you wish?" I replied shortly, "You ought to know, since you have just read your master's orders. I wish to enter the chateau." He seemed overcome. "Then you are going into her room?" I began to lose patience. "Damn it, are you presuming to question me?" He stammered in confusion. No, sir, but it has not been opened since the death. If you will be kind enough to wait 5 minutes, I will go and see if—" I interrupted him angrily. "See here, what do you mean by your tricks? You know very well you cannot enter the room, since here is the key." He no longer objected. "Then, sir, I will show you the way." "Show me the staircase and leave me. I'll find my way without you." "But, sir, indeed." This time I lost patience, and pushing him aside, went into the house. I first went through the kitchen, then 2 rooms occupied by this man and his wife. I then crossed a large hall, mounted a staircase, and recognized the door described by my friend. I easily opened it and entered the apartment. It was so dark that at first I could distinguish nothing. I stopped short, disagreeably affected by that disagreeable, musty odor of closed, unoccupied rooms. As my eyes slowly became accustomed to the darkness, I saw plainly enough a large and disordered bedroom, the bed without sheets but still retaining its mattresses and pillows, on one of which was a deep impression, as though an elbow or a head had recently rested there. The chairs all seemed out of place. I noticed that the door, doubtless that of a closet, had remained half open. I first went to the window, which I opened to let in the light, but the fastenings of the shutters had grown so rusty that I could not move them. I even tried to break them with my sword, but without success. As I was growing irritated over my useless efforts and could now see fairly well in the semi-darkness, I gave up the hope of getting more light and went over to the writing desk. I seated myself in an armchair and, letting down the lid of the desk, I opened the drawer designated. It was full to the top. I needed but 3 packages which I knew how to recognize, and began searching for them. I was straining my eyes in the effort to read the superscriptions when I seemed to hear, or rather feel, something rustle back of me. I paid no attention, believing that a draught from the window was moving some drapery. But in a minute or so, another movement, almost imperceptible, sent a strangely disagreeable little shiver over my skin. It was so stupid to be affected, even slightly, that self-respect prevented my turning around. I had just found the second package I needed, and was about to lay my hand on the third, when a long and painful sigh, uttered just at my shoulder, made me bound like a madman from my seat and land several feet off. As I jumped, I had turned round, my hand on the hilt of my sword, and truly, if I had not felt it at my side, I should have taken to my heels like a coward. A tall woman dressed in white stood gazing at me from the back of the chair where I had been sitting an instant before. Such a shudder ran through all my limbs that I nearly fell backward. No one who has not experienced it can understand that frightful, unreasoning terror. The mind becomes vague, the heart ceases to beat, the entire body grows limp as a sponge. I do not believe in ghosts, nevertheless I collapsed from a hideous dread of the dead, and I suffered in a few moments more than in all the rest of my life, from the irresistible terror of the supernatural. If she had not spoken, I should have died, perhaps. But she spoke. She spoke in a sweet, sad voice that set my nerves vibrating. I dare not say that I became master of myself and recovered my reason. No, I was terrified and scarcely knew what I was doing. But a certain innate pride, a remnant of soldierly instinct, made me, almost in spite of myself, maintain a bold front. She said,
"Oh, sir, you can render me a great service."
I wanted to reply, but it was impossible for me to pronounce a word. Only a vague sound came from my throat. She continued,
"Will you? You can save me, cure me. I suffer frightfully. I suffer, oh, how I suffer."
And she slowly seated herself in my armchair, still looking at me.
"Will you?"
she said. I nodded in assent, my voice still being paralyzed. Then she held out to me a tortoise-shell comb and murmured,
"Comb my hair. Oh, comb my hair. That will cure me. It must be combed. Look at my head. How I suffer. My hair pulls so."
Her hair unbound, very long and very black, it seemed to me, hung over the back of the armchair and touched the floor. Why did I promise? Why did I take that comb with a shudder? And why did I hold in my hands her long black hair that gave my skin a frightful cold sensation, as though I were handling snakes? I cannot tell. That sensation has remained in my fingers, and I still tremble in recalling it. I combed her hair. I handled I know not how those icy locks. I twisted, knotted, and unknotted and braided them. She sighed, bowed her head, and seemed happy. Suddenly she said,
"Thank you,"
snatched the comb from my hands, and fled by the door that I had noticed ajar. Left alone, I experienced for several seconds the horrible agitation of one who awakens from a nightmare. At length I regained my senses. I ran to the window and with a mighty effort burst open the shutters, letting a flood of light into the room. Immediately I sprang to the door by which that being had departed. I found it closed and immovable. Then the mad desire to flee overcame me like a panic, the panic which soldiers know in battle. I seized the 3 packets of letters on the open desk, ran from the room, dashed down the stairs 4 steps at a time, found myself outside, I know not how, and perceiving my horse a few steps off, leaped into the saddle and galloped away. I stopped only when I reached Rouen and alighted at my lodgings. Throwing the reins to my orderly, I fled to my room and shut myself in to reflect. For an hour I anxiously asked myself if I were not the victim of a hallucination. Undoubtedly I had one of those incomprehensible nervous attacks, those exaltations of the mind that give rise to visions and are the stronghold of the supernatural. And I was about to believe I had seen a vision, had a hallucination, when, as I approached the window, my eyes fell by chance upon my breast. My military cape was covered with long black hairs. One by one, with trembling fingers, I plucked them off and threw them away. I then called my orderly. I was too disturbed, too upset to go and see my friend that day, and also I wished to reflect more fully upon what I ought to tell him. I sent him his letters, for which he gave the soldier a receipt. He asked after me most particularly, and, on being told I was ill, had had a sunstroke, appeared exceedingly anxious. Next morning I went to him, determined to tell him the truth. He had gone out the evening before and had not yet returned. I called again during the day. My friend was still absent. After waiting a week longer without news of him, I notified the authorities and a judicial search was instituted. Not the slightest trace of his whereabouts or manner of disappearance was discovered. A minute inspection of the abandoned chateau revealed nothing of a suspicious character. There was no indication that a woman had been concealed there. After fruitless researches, all further efforts were abandoned, and for 56 years I have heard nothing. I know no more than before.
Was it a dream? I had loved her madly. Why does one love? Why does one love? How queer it is to see only one being in the world, to have only one thought in one's mind, only one desire in the heart, and only one name on the lips, a name which comes up continually, which rises like the water in a spring from the depths of the soul, which rises to the lips, and which one repeats over and over again, which one whispers ceaselessly everywhere like a prayer. I'm going to tell you our story, for love only has one which is always the same. I met her and loved her, that is all. And for a whole year I have lived on her tenderness, on her caresses, in her arms, in her dresses, on her words, so completely wrapped up, bound, imprisoned in everything which came from her, that I no longer knew whether it was day or night, if I was dead or alive, on this old earth of ours or elsewhere. And then she died. How? I do not know. I no longer know, but one evening she came home wet, for it was raining heavily, and the next day she coughed, and she coughed for about a week and took her to bed. What happened I do not remember now, but doctors came, wrote, and went away. Medicines were brought, and some women made her drink them. Her hands were hot, her forehead was burning, and her eyes bright and sad. When I spoke to her she answered me, but I do not remember what we said. I have forgotten everything, everything, everything. She died, and I very well remember her slight, feeble sigh. The nurse said, "Ah," and I understood. I knew nothing more, nothing. I saw a priest who said, "Your mistress?" and it seemed to me as if he were insulting her. As she was dead, nobody had the right to know that any longer, and I turned him out. Another who came was very kind and tender, and I shed tears when he spoke to me about her. They consulted me about the funeral, but I do not remember anything that they said, though I recollected the coffin and the sound of the hammer when they nailed her down in it. Oh, God, God! She was buried, she in that hole! Some people came, female friends. I made my escape and ran away. I ran, and then I walked through the streets and went home, and the next day I started on a journey. Yesterday I returned to Paris, and when I saw my room again, our room, our bed, our furniture, everything that remained of the life of a human being after death, I was seized by such a violent attack of fresh grief that I was very near opening the window and throwing myself out into the street. As I could not remain any longer among these things, between these walls which had enclosed and sheltered her, and which retained 1,000 atoms of her skin and of her breath in their imperceptible crevices, I took up my hat to make my escape, and just as I reached the door, I passed the large glass in the hall which she had put there so that she might be able to look at herself every day from head to foot as she went out, to see if her toilet looked well and was correct and pretty from her little boots to her bonnet. And I stopped short in front of that looking-glass in which she had so often been reflected, so often that it also must have retained her reflection. I was standing there trembling with my eyes fixed on the glass, on that flat, profound, empty glass which had contained her entirely and had possessed her as much as I had, as my passionate looks had. I felt as if I loved that glass. I touched it. It was cold. Oh, the recollection! Sorrowful mirror, burning mirror, horrible mirror, which makes us suffer such torments. Happy are the men whose hearts forget everything that it has contained, everything that has passed before it, everything that has looked at itself in it, that has been reflected in its affection and its love. How I suffer! I went on without knowing it, without wishing it. I went towards the cemetery. I found her simple grave, a white marble cross with these few words: "She was loved, and died." She is there below, decayed. How horrible! I sobbed with my forehead on the ground, and I stopped there for a long time. Then I saw that it was getting dark, and a mad wish, the wish of a despairing lover, seized me. I wished to pass the night, the last night, in weeping on her grave. But I should be seen and driven out. How was I to manage? I was cunning and got up and began to roam about in that city of the dead. I walked and walked. How small this city is in comparison with the other, the city in which we live, and yet how much more numerous the dead are than the living. We want high houses, wide streets, and much room for the 4 generations who see the daylight at the same time, drink water from the spring, and wine from the vines, and eat the bread from the plains. And for all the generations of the dead, for all that ladder of humanity that has descended down to us, there is scarcely anything afield, scarcely anything. The earth takes them back. Oblivion effaces them. Adieu. At the end of the abandoned cemetery, I suddenly perceived that the one where those who have been dead a long time finish mingling with the soil, where the crosses themselves decay, where the last comers will be put tomorrow. It is full of untended roses, of strong and dark cypress trees, a sad and beautiful garden nourished on human flesh. I was alone, perfectly alone, and so I crouched in a green tree, and hid myself there completely among the thick and somber branches, and I waited, clinging to the stem, like a shipwrecked man does to a plank. When it was quite dark, I left my refuge and began to walk softly, slowly, and audibly through that ground full of dead people, and I wandered about for a long time, but could not find her again. I went on with extended arms, knocking against the tombs with my hands, my feet, my knees, my chest, even with my head, without being able to find her. I touched and felt about like a blind man groping his way. I felt the stones, the crosses, the iron railings, the metal wreaths, and the wreaths of faded flowers. I read the names with my fingers by passing them over the letters. What a night! What a night! I could not find her again. There was no moon. What a night! I am frightened, horribly frightened in these narrow paths, between two rows of graves. Graves, 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 nothing but graves! On my right, on my left, in front of me, around me, everywhere there were graves. I sat down on one of them, for I could not walk any longer. My knees were so weak. I could hear my heart beat, and I could hear something else as well. What? A confused, nameless noise. Was the noise in my head in the impenetrable night, or beneath the mysterious earth, the earth sown with human corpses? I looked all around me, but I cannot say how long I'd remained there. I was paralyzed with terror, drunk with fright, ready to shout out, ready to die. Suddenly it seemed to me as if the slab of marble on which I was sitting was moving. Certainly it was moving, as if it were being raised. With a bound I sprang on to the neighboring tomb, and I distinctly saw the stone which I had just quitted rise upright, and the dead person appeared, a naked skeleton, which was pushing the stone back with its bent back. I saw it quite clearly, although the night was so dark. On the cross I could read, "Here lies Jacques Olivant, who died at the age of 51. He loved his family, was kind and honorable, and died in the grace of the Lord." The dead man also read what was inscribed on his tombstone. Then he picked up a stone off the path, a little pointed stone, and began to scrape the letters carefully. He slowly effaced them all together, and with the hollows of his eyes he looked at the places where they had been engraved, and with the tip of the bone, that had been his forefinger, he wrote in luminous letters like those lines which one traces on walls with the tip of a lucifer match. "Here reposes Jacques Olivant, who died at the age of 51. He hastened his father's death by his unkindness, as he wished to inherit his fortune. He tortured his wife, tormented his children, deceived his neighbors, robbed everyone he could, and died wretched." When he had finished writing, the dead man stood motionless, looking at his work, and turning round I saw that all the graves were open, that all the dead bodies had emerged from them, and that all had effaced the lies inscribed on the gravestones by their relations, and had substituted the truth instead. And I saw that all had been tormentors of their neighbors, malicious, dishonest, hypocrites, liars, rogues, calumniators, envious, that they had stolen, deceived, performed every disgraceful, every abominable action. These good fathers, these faithful wives, these devoted sons, these chaste daughters, these honest tradesmen, these men and women who were called irreproachable, and they were called irreproachable. And they were all writing at the same time, on the threshold of their eternal abode, the truth, the terrible and the holy truth which everybody is ignorant of, or pretends to be ignorant of while the others are alive. I thought that she also must have written something on her tombstone, and now, running without any fear among the half-open coffins, among the corpses and skeletons, I went towards her, sure that I should find her immediately. I recognized her at once, without seeing her face, which was covered by the winding sheet, and on the marble cross where shortly before I had read, "She loved, was loved, and died." I now saw. Having gone out one day in order to deceive her lover, she caught cold in the rain and died. It appears that they found me at daybreak, lying on the grave unconscious.
The Horla, May 8th. What a lovely day!
I've spent all the morning lying in the grass in front of my house, under the enormous plantain tree which covers it, and shades and shelters the whole of it. I like this part of the country, and I am fond of living here because I am attached to it by deep roots, profound and delicate roots which attach a man to the soil on which his ancestors were born and died, which attach him to what people think and what they eat, to the usages as well as to the food, local expressions, the peculiar language of the peasants, to the smell of the soil, of the villages, and of the atmosphere itself. I love my house in which I grew up. From my windows I can see the Seine, which flows by the side of my garden. On the other side of the road, almost through my grounds, the great and wide Seine, which goes to Rouen and Havre, and which is covered with boats passing to and fro. On the left, down yonder, lies Rouen, that large town with its blue roofs, under its pointed Gothic towers. They are innumerable, delicate or broad, dominated by the spire of the cathedral, and full of bells which sound through the blue air on fine mornings, sending their sweet and distant iron clang to me, their metallic sound which the breeze wafts in my direction, now stronger and now weaker, according as the wind is stronger or lighter. What a delicious morning it was! About 11 o'clock, a long line of boats drawn by a steam tug as big as a fly, and which scarcely puffed while emitting its thick smoke, passed my gate. After 2 English schooners, whose red flag fluttered toward the sky, there came a magnificent Brazilian three-master. It was perfectly white and wonderfully clean and shining. I saluted it, I hardly know why, except that the sight of the vessel gave me great pleasure. May 12th. I have had a slight feverish attack for the last few days, and I feel ill, or rather I feel low-spirited. Whence do these mysterious influences come, which change our happiness into a discouragement, and our self-confidence into diffidence? One might almost say that the invisible air, is full of unknowable forces, whose mysterious presence we have to endure. I wake up in the best spirits, with an inclination to sing in my throat. Why? I go down by the side of the water, and suddenly, after walking a short distance, I return home wretched, as if some misfortune were awaiting me there. Why? Is it a cold shiver which, passing over my skin, has upset my nerves and given me low spirits? Is it the form of the clouds, or the color of the sky, or the color of the surrounding objects, which is so changeable, which have troubled my thoughts as they passed before my eyes? Who can tell? Everything that surrounds us, everything that we see without looking at it, everything that we touch without knowing it, everything that we handle without feeling it, all that we meet without clearly distinguishing it, has a rapid, surprising, and inexplicable effect upon us and upon our organs, and through them on our ideas and on our heart itself. How profound that mystery of the invisible is! We cannot fathom it with our miserable senses, with our eyes which are unable to perceive what is either too small or too great, too near to or too far from us. Neither the inhabitants of a star nor a drop of water, with our ears that deceive us, for they transmit to us the vibrations of the air in sonorous notes. They are fairies who work the miracle of changing that movement into noise, and by that metamorphosis give birth to music, which makes the mute agitation of nature musical. With our sense of smell, which is smaller than that of a dog, with our sense of taste, which can scarcely distinguish the age of a wine. Oh, if we only had other organs which would work other miracles in our favor, what a number of fresh things we might discover around us. May 16th. I am ill, decidedly. I was so well last month. I am feverish, horribly feverish, or rather I am in a state of feverish enervation, which makes my mind suffer as much as my body. I have without ceasing that horrible sensation of some danger threatening me, that apprehension of some coming misfortune or of approaching death, that presentiment which is no doubt an attack of some illness which is still unknown, which germinates in the flesh and in the blood. May 18th. I have just come from consulting my medical man, for I could no longer get any sleep. He found that my pulse was high, my eyes dilated, my nerves highly strung, but no alarming symptoms. I must have a course of shower baths and a bromide of potassium. May 25th. No change. My state is really very peculiar. As the evening comes on, an incomprehensible feeling of disquietude seizes me, just as if night concealed some terrible menace toward me. I dine quickly and then try to read, but I do not understand the words, and can scarcely distinguish the letters. Then I walk up and down in my drawing-room, oppressed by a feeling of confused and irresistible fear, the fear of sleep and fear of my bed. About 10 o'clock I go up to my room. As soon as I have got in, I double lock and bolt it. I am frightened. Of what? Up till the present time I have been frightened of nothing. I open my cupboards and look under my bed. I listen. To what? How strange it is that a simple feeling of discomfort, impeded or heightened circulation, perhaps the irritation of a nervous thread, a slight congestion, a small disturbance in the imperfect and delicate functions of our living machinery, can turn the most light-hearted man into a melancholy one, and make a coward of the bravest. Then I go to bed, and I wait for sleep as a man might wait for the executioner.
I wait for its coming with dread, and my heart beats and my legs tremble, while my whole body shivers beneath the warmth of the bedclothes, until the moment when I suddenly fall asleep, as one would throw oneself into a pool of stagnant water in order to drown oneself. I do not feel coming over me as I used to do formerly, this perfidious sleep which is close to me and watching me, which is going to seize me by the head to close my eyes and annihilate me. I sleep a long time, 2 or 3 hours perhaps. Then a dream, no, a nightmare lays hold on me. I feel that I am in bed and asleep. I feel it and I know it, and I feel also that somebody is coming close to me, is looking at me, touching me, is getting onto my bed, is kneeling on my chest, is taking my neck between his hands and squeezing it with all his might in order to strangle me. I struggle, bound by that terrible powerlessness which paralyzes us in our dreams. I try to cry out, but I cannot. I want to move, I cannot. I try with the most violent efforts and out of breath to turn over and throw off this being which is crushing and suffocating me. I cannot. And then suddenly I wake up, shaken and bathed in perspiration. I light a candle and find that I am alone. And after that crisis which occurs every night, I at length fall asleep and slumber tranquilly till morning. June 2nd. My state has grown worse. What is the matter with me? The bromide does me no good, and the shower baths have no effect whatever. Sometimes, in order to tire myself out, though I am fatigued enough already, I go for a walk in the forest of Rumère. I used to think at first that the fresh light and soft air, impregnated with the odor of herbs and leaves, would instill new blood into my veins and impart fresh energy to my heart. I turned into a broad ride in the wood, and then I turned to La Brouille, through a narrow path between 2 rows of exceedingly tall trees, which placed a thick, green, almost black roof between the sky and me. A sudden shiver ran through me, not a cold shiver, but a shiver of agony, and so I hastened my steps, uneasy at being alone in the wood, frightened stupidly without reason at the profound solitude. Suddenly it seemed to me as if I were being followed, that somebody was walking at my heels, close, quite close to me, near enough to touch me. I turned round suddenly, but I was alone. I saw nothing behind me except a straight, broad ride, empty and bordered by high trees, horribly empty. On the other side it also extended until it was lost in the distance, and looked just the same, terrible. I closed my eyes. Why? And then I began to turn round on one heel very quickly, just like a top. I nearly fell down and opened my eyes. The trees were dancing round me, and the earth heaved. I was obliged to sit down. Then, I no longer remembered how I had come. What a strange idea! What a strange idea! I did not the least know. I started off to the right, and got back into the avenue which had led me into the middle of the forest. June 3rd. I have had a terrible night. I shall go away for a few weeks, for no doubt a journey will set me up again. July 2nd. I have come back quite cured, and have had a most delightful trip in the bargain. I have been to Mont Saint-Michel, which I had not seen before. What a sight when one arrives as I did at Avranches toward the end of the day. The town stands on a hill, and I was taken into the public garden at the extremity of the town. I uttered a cry of astonishment. An extraordinarily large bay lay extended before me, as far as my eyes could reach, between 2 hills which were lost to sight in the mist. And in the middle of this immense yellow bay, under a clear golden sky, a peculiar hill rose up, somber and pointed in the midst of the sand. The sun had just disappeared, and under the still flaming sky the outline of that fantastic rock stood out, which bears on its summit a fantastic monument. At daybreak I went to it. The tide was low as it had been the night before, and I saw that wonderful abbey rise up before me as I approached it. After several hours' walking, I reached the enormous mass of rocks which supports the little town, dominated by the great church. Having climbed the steep and narrow street, I entered the most wonderful Gothic building that is ever built to God on earth, as large as a town, full of low rooms which seem buried beneath vaulted roofs, and lofty galleries supported by delicate columns. I entered this gigantic granite jewel, which is as light as a bit of lace, covered with towers, with slender belfries to which spiral staircases ascend, and which raise their strange heads that bristle with chimeras, with devils, with fantastic animals, with monstrous flowers, and which are joined together by finely carved arches, to the blue sky by day, and to the black sky by night. When I had reached the summit, I said to the monk who accompanied me, "Father, how happy you must be here!" And he replied, "It is very windy, monsieur." And so we began to talk while watching the rising tide, which ran over the sand and covered it with a steel cuirass. And then the monk told me stories, all the old stories belonging to the place, legends, nothing but legends. One of them struck me forcibly. The country people, those belonging to the Mornay, declare that at one night one can hear talking going on in the sand, and then that one hears 2 goats bleat, one with a strong, the other with a weak voice. Incredulous people declare that it is nothing but the cry of the seabirds, which occasionally resembles bleatings, and occasionally human lamentations. But belated fishermen swear that they have met an old shepherd, whose head, which is covered by his cloak, they can never see, wandering on the downs between two tides, round the little town placed so far out of the world, and who is guiding and walking before them a he-goat with a man's face, and a she-goat with a woman's face, and both of them with white hair, and talking incessantly, quarrelling in a strange language, and then suddenly ceasing to talk in order to bleat with all their might. Do you believe it? I asked the monk. I scarcely know, he replied. And I continued, if there are other beings besides ourselves on this earth, how comes it that we have not known it for so long a time? Or why have you not seen them? How is it that I have not seen them? He replied, do we see the 100,000th part of what exists? Look here, there is the wind, which is the strongest force in nature, which knocks down men and blows down buildings, uproots trees, raises the sea into mountains of water, destroys cliffs, and casts great ships onto the breakers. The wind which kills, which whistles, which sighs, which roars. Have you ever seen it? And can you see it? It exists for all that, however. I was silent before this simple reasoning. That man was a philosopher, or perhaps a fool. I could not say which exactly, so I held my tongue. What he had said had often been in my own thoughts. July 3rd. I have slept badly. Certainly there is some feverish influence here, for my coachman is suffering in the same way as I am. When I went back home yesterday, I noticed his singular paleness, and I asked him, what is the matter with you, Jean? The matter is that I never get any rest, and my nights devour my days. Since your departure, monsieur, there's been a spell over me. However, the other servants are all well, but I am very frightened of having another attack myself. July 4th. I am decidedly taken again, for my old nightmares have returned. Last night I felt somebody leaning on me who was sucking my life from between my lips with his mouth. Yes, he was sucking it out of my neck like a leech would have done. Then he got up, satiated, and I woke up so beaten, crushed, and annihilated that I could not move. If this continues for a few days, I shall certainly go away again. July 5th. Have I lost my reason? What has happened? What I saw last night is so strange that my head wanders when I think of it. As I do now every evening, I had locked my door, and then being thirsty, I drank half a glass of water, and I accidentally noticed that the water bottle was full up to the cut-glass stopper. Then I went to bed, and fell into one of my terrible sleeps, from which I was aroused in about 2 hours by a still more terrible shock. Picture to yourself a sleeping man who is being murdered, and who wakes up with a knife in his chest, and who is rattling in his throat, covered with blood, and who can no longer breathe and is going to die, and does not understand anything at all about it. There it is. Having recovered my senses, I was thirsty again, so I lit a candle and went to the table on which my water bottle was. I lifted it up and tilted it over my glass, but nothing came out. It was empty. It was completely empty. At first I could not understand it at all, and then suddenly I was seized by such a terrible feeling that I had to sit down, or rather I fell into a chair. Then I sprang up with a bound to look about me, and then I sat down again, overcome by astonishment and fear, in front of the transparent crystal bottle. I looked at it with fixed eyes, trying to conjecture, but my hands trembled. Somebody had drunk the water, but who? I? I, without any doubt. It could surely only be I. In that case, I was a somnambulist. I lived without knowing it, that double mysterious life which makes us doubt whether there are not two beings in us, or whether a strange, unknowable, and invisible being does not at such moments, when our soul is in a state of torpor, animate our captive body which obeys this other being, as it does us ourselves, and more than it does ourselves. Oh, who will understand my horrible agony? Who will understand the emotion of a man who is sound in mind, wide awake, full of sound sense, and who looks in horror at the remains of a little water that has disappeared while he was asleep, through the glass of a water bottle? And I remained there until it was daylight, without venturing to go to bed again. July 6th. I am going mad. Again, all the contents of my water bottle have been drunk during the night, or rather, I have drunk it. But is it I? Is it I? Who could it be? Who? Oh, God, am I going mad? Who will save me? July 10th. I have just been through some surprising ordeals. Decidedly, I am mad, and yet, on July 6th, before going to bed, I put some wine, milk, water, bread, and strawberries on my table. Somebody drank, I drank, all the water and a little of the milk, but neither the wine, bread, nor the strawberries were touched. On the 7th of July, I renewed the same experiment, with the same results, and on July 8th, I left out the water and the milk, and nothing was touched. Lastly, on July 9th, I put only water and milk on my table, taking care to wrap up the bottles in white muslin and to tie down the stoppers.
Then I rubbed my lips, my beard, and my hands with pencil lead and went to bed. Irresistible sleep seized me, which was soon followed by a terrible awakening. I had not moved, and my sheets were not marked. I rushed to the table. The muslin round the bottles remained intact. I undid the string, trembling with fear. All the water had been drunk, and so had the milk. Ah, great God! I must start for Paris immediately. July 12th, Paris. I must have lost my head during the last few days. I must be the plaything of my enervated imagination, unless I am really a somnambulist, or that I have been brought under the power of one of those influences which have been proved to exist, but which have hitherto been inexplicable, which are called suggestions. In any case, my mental state bordered on madness, and 24 hours of Paris sufficed to restore me to my equilibrium. Yesterday, after doing some business and paying some visits which instilled fresh and invigorating mental air into me, I wound up my evening at the Théâtre Français. A play by Alexandre Dumas the younger was being acted, and his active and powerful mind completed my cure. Certainly solitude is dangerous for active minds. We require men who can think and can talk around us. When we are alone for a long time, we people space with phantoms. I returned along the boulevards to my hotel in excellent spirits. Amid the jostling of the crowd, I thought, not without irony, of my terrors and surmises of the previous week, because I believed, yes, I believed, that an invisible being lived beneath my roof. How weak our head is, and how quickly it is terrified and goes astray, as soon as we are struck by a small incomprehensible fact. Instead of concluding with these simple words, I do not understand because the cause escapes me, we immediately imagine terrible mysteries and supernatural powers. July 14th. Fate of the Republic. I walked through the streets, and the crackers and flags amused me like a child. Still, it is very foolish to be merry on a fixed date by a government decree. The populace is an imbecile flock of sheep, now steadily patient, and now in ferocious revolt. Say to it, amuse yourself, and it amuses itself. Say to it, go and fight with your neighbor, and it goes and fights. Say to it, vote for the emperor, and it votes for the emperor. And then to say to it, vote for the republic, and it votes for the republic. Those who direct it are also stupid. But instead of obeying men, they obey principles, which can only be stupid, sterile, and false, for the very reason that they are principles, that is to say, ideas which are considered as certain and unchangeable in this world where one is certain of nothing, since light is an illusion and noise is an illusion. July 16th. I saw some things yesterday that troubled me very much. I was dining at my cousin's, Madame Sable, whose husband is colonel of the 76th Chasseurs at Le Mans. There were 2 young women there, one of whom had married a medical man, Dr. Parent, who devotes himself a great deal to nervous diseases and the extraordinary manifestations to which at this moment experiments in hypnotism and suggestion give rise. He related to us at some length the enormous results obtained by English scientists and the doctors of the medical school at Nancy, and the facts which he had adduced appeared to be so strange that I declared I was altogether incredulous. "We are," he declared, "on the point of discovering one of the most important secrets of nature. I mean to say one of its most important secrets on this earth, for there are certainly some of which are of a different kind of importance up in the stars yonder. Ever since man has thought, since he has been able to express and write down his thoughts, he has felt himself close to a mystery which is impenetrable to his coarse and imperfect senses, and he endeavors to supplement the want of power of his organs by the efforts of his intellect. As long as that intellect still remained in its elementary stage, this intercourse with invisible spirits assumed forms which were commonplace, though terrifying. Thence sprang the popular belief in the supernatural, the legends of wandering spirits, of fairies, of gnomes, ghosts. I might even say the legend of God, for our conceptions of the workman-creator, from whatever religion they may have come down to us, are certainly the most mediocre, the stupidest, and the most unacceptable inventions that ever sprang from the frightened brain of any human creatures. Nothing is truer than what Voltaire says. God made man in his own image, but man has certainly paid him back again. But for rather more than a century, men seem to have had a presentiment of something new. Mesmer and some others have put us on an unexpected track, and especially within the last 2 or 3 years we have arrived at really surprising results." My cousin, who is very incredulous, smiled, and Dr. Parent said to her, "Would you like me to try and send you to sleep, madam?"
"Yes, certainly."
She sat down in an easy chair, and he began to look at her fixedly, so as to fascinate her. I suddenly felt myself somewhat uncomfortable, with a beating heart and a choking feeling in my throat. I saw that Madame Sable's eyes were growing heavy, her mouth twitched, and her bosom heaved, and at the end of 10 minutes she was asleep. "Stand behind her," the doctor said to me, and so I took a seat behind her. He put a visiting card into her hands and said to her, "This is a looking-glass. What do you see in it?" And she replied, "I see my cousin."
What is he doing?
He is twisting his mustache.
And now?
He is taking a photograph out of his pocket.
Whose photograph is it?
His own.
That was true, and that photograph had been given me that same evening at the hotel.
What is his attitude in this portrait?
He is standing up with his hat in his hand.
So she saw on that card, on that piece of white pasteboard, as if she had seen it in a looking-glass. The young women were frightened and exclaimed,
"That is quite enough! Quite enough!"
But the doctor said to her authoritatively,
You will get up at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Then you will go and call on your cousin at his hotel, and ask him to lend you 5,000 francs which your husband demands of you, and which he will ask for when he sets out on his coming journey.
Then he woke her up. On returning to my hotel, I thought over this curious seance, and I was assailed by doubts, not as to my cousin's absolute and undoubted good faith, for I had known her as well as if she had been my own sister ever since she was a child, but as to a possible trick on the doctor's part. Had not he, perhaps, kept a glass hidden in his hand, which he showed to the young woman in her sleep, at the same time as he did the card? Professional conjurers do things which are just as singular. So I went home and to bed, and this morning at about 8:30, I was awakened by my footman, who said to me,
Madame Sable is asked to see you immediately, monsieur.
So I dressed hastily and went to her. She sat down in some agitation, with her eyes on the floor, and without raising her veil, she said to me,
"My dear cousin, I am going to ask a great favor of you."
"What is it, cousin?"
"I do not like to tell you, and yet I must. I am in absolute want of 5,000 francs.
"What, you?"
"Yes, I, or rather my husband, who has asked me to procure them for him."
I was so stupefied that I stammered out my answers. I asked myself whether she had not really been making fun of me with Dr. Parent, if it were not merely a well-acted farce which had been got up beforehand. On looking at her attentively, however, my doubts disappeared. She was trembling with grief, so painful was this step to her, and I was sure that her throat was full of sobs. I knew that she was very rich, and so I continued. "What? Has not your husband 5,000 francs at his disposal? Come, think. Are you sure that he commissioned you to ask me for them?" She hesitated for a few seconds, as if she were making a great effort to search her memory, and then she replied,
Yes, I am quite sure of it."
"He has written to you?" She hesitated again and reflected, and I guessed the torture of her thoughts. She did not know. She only knew that she was to borrow 5,000 francs of me for her husband. So she told a lie.
"Yes, he has written to me."
"When, pray? You did not mention it to me yesterday."
"I received his letter this morning."
"Can you show it to me?"
No. It contained private matters, things too personal to ourselves. I burnt it."
"So your husband runs into debt?" She hesitated again and then murmured,
"I do not know."
Thereupon I said bluntly, "I have not 5,000 francs at my disposal at this moment, my dear cousin." She uttered a kind of cry as if she were in pain and said,
Oh, I beseech you to get them for me."
She got excited and clasped her hands as if she were praying to me. I heard her voice change its tone. She wept and stammered, harassed and dominated by the irresistible order that she had received.
Oh, I beg you to. If you knew what I am suffering, I want them today."
I had pity on her. "You shall have them by and by, I swear to you."
"Oh, thank you, how kind you are."
I continued, "Do you remember what took place at your house last night?" "Yes." "Do you remember that Dr. Parent sent you to sleep?" "Yes." "Oh, very well then. He ordered you to come to me this morning to borrow 5,000 francs, and at this moment you are obeying that suggestion." She considered for a few moments and then replied,
"But as it is my husband who wants them."
For a whole hour I tried to convince her, but could not succeed, and when she had gone I went to the doctor. He was just going out, and he listened to me with a smile and said,
"Do you believe now?"
"Yes, I cannot help it."
"Let us go to your cousin's."
She was already dozing on a couch, overcome with fatigue. The doctor felt her pulse, looked at her for some time with one hand raised toward her eyes, which she closed by degrees under the irresistible power of this magnetic influence, and when she was asleep, he said,
"Your husband does not require the 5,000 francs any longer. You must therefore forget that you asked your cousin to lend them to you, and if he speaks to you about it, you will not understand him."
Then he woke her up, and I took out a pocketbook and said, "Here is what you asked me for this morning, my dear cousin." But she was so surprised that I did not venture to persist. Nevertheless, I tried to recall the circumstance to her, but she denied it vigorously, thought I was making fun of her, and in the end very nearly lost her temper. There, I have just come back, and I have not been able to eat any lunch, for this experiment has altogether upset me. July 19th. Many people to whom I have told the adventure have laughed at me. I no longer know what to think. The wise man says,
"Perhaps."
July 21st. I dined at Bouival, and then I spent the evening at a boatman's ball. Decidedly everything depends on place and surroundings. It would be the height of folly to believe in the supernatural on the Île de la Grenouille, but on the top of Mont Saint-Michel or in India we are terribly under the influence of our surroundings.
I shall return home next week. July 30th. I came back to my own house yesterday. Everything is going on well. August 2nd. Nothing fresh. It is splendid weather, and I spend my days in watching the Seine flow past. August 4th. Quarrels among my servants. They declare that the glasses are broken in the cupboards at night. The footman accuses the cook. She accuses the needlewoman, and the latter accuses the other two. Who is the culprit? It would take a clever person to tell. August 6th. This time, I am not mad. I have seen. I can doubt no longer. I have seen it. I was walking at 2 o'clock among my rose trees, in the full sunlight, in the walk bordered by autumn roses which are beginning to fall. As I stopped to look at a Guion de Berly, which had 3 splendid blooms, I distinctly saw the stalk of one of the roses bend close to me, as if an invisible hand had bent it, and then break, as if that hand had picked it. Then the flower raised itself, following the curve which a hand would have described and carrying it toward a mouth, and remained suspended in the transparent air, alone and motionless, a terrible red spot 3 yards from my eyes. In desperation, I rushed at it to take it. I found nothing. It had disappeared. Then I was seized with furious rage against myself, for it is not wholesome for a reasonable and serious man to have such hallucinations. But was it a hallucination? I turned to look for the stalk, and I found it immediately under the bush, freshly broken, between the 2 other roses which remained on the branch. I returned home then, with a much disturbed mind, for I am certain now, certain as I am of the alternation of day and night, that there exists close to me an invisible being, who lives on milk and on water, who can touch objects, take them and change their places, who is consequently endowed with a material nature, although imperceptible to sense, and who lives as I do under my roof. August 7th. I slept tranquilly. He drank the water out of my decanter, but did not disturb my sleep. I ask myself whether I am mad. As I was walking just now in the sun by the riverside, doubts as to my own sanity arose in me, not vague doubts such as I have had hitherto, but precise and absolute doubts. I have seen mad people, and I have known some who were quite intelligent, lucid, even clear-sighted in every concern of life, except on one point. They could speak clearly, readily, profoundly on everything, till their thoughts were caught in the breakers of the delusions, and went to pieces there, were dispersed and swamped in that furious and terrible sea of fogs and squalls which is called madness. I certainly should think that I was mad, absolutely mad, if I were not conscious that I knew my state, if I could not fathom it and analyze it with the most complete lucidity. I should, in fact, be a reasonable man, laboring under a hallucination. Some unknown disturbance must have been excited in my brain, one of those disturbances which physiologists of the present day try to note and try to fix precisely, and that disturbance must have caused a profound gulf in my mind, and in the order and logic of my ideas. Similar phenomena occur in dreams, and lead us through the most unlikely phantasmagoria, without causing us any surprise, because our verifying apparatus and our sense of control have gone to sleep, while our imaginative faculty wakes and works. Was it not possible that one of the imperceptible keys of the cerebral fingerboard had been paralyzed in me? Some men lose the recollection of proper names, or of verbs, or of numbers, or merely of dates, in consequence of an accident. The localization of all the avenues of thought has been accomplished nowadays. What, then, would there be surprising in the fact that my faculty of controlling the unreality of certain hallucinations should be destroyed for the time being? I thought of all of this as I walked by the side of the water. The sun was shining brightly on the river and made the earth delightful, while it filled me with love for life, for the swallows, whose swift agility is always delightful in my eyes, for the plants by the riverside, whose rustling is a pleasure to my ears. By degrees, however, an inexplicable feeling of discomfort seized me. It seemed to me as if some unknown force were numbing and stopping me, were preventing me from going further, and were calling me back. I felt that painful wish to return which comes on you when you have left a beloved invalid at home, and are seized by a presentiment that he is worse. I therefore returned despite of myself, feeling certain that I should find some bad news awaiting me, a letter or a telegram. There was nothing, however, and I was surprised and uneasy, more so than if I had had another fantastic vision. August 8th. I spent a terrible evening yesterday. He does not show himself any more, but I feel that he is near me, watching me, looking at me, penetrating me, dominating me, and more terrible to me when he hides himself thus than if he were to manifest his constant and invisible presence by supernatural phenomena. However, I slept. August 9th. Nothing, but I am afraid. August 10th. Nothing. But what will happen tomorrow? August 11th. Still nothing. I cannot stop at home with this fear hanging over me and these thoughts in my mind. I shall go away. August 12th. 10 o'clock at night. All day long I have been trying to get away and have not been able. I contemplated a simple and easy act of liberty, a carriage ride to Rouen, and I have not been able to do it. What is the reason? August 13th. When one is attacked by certain maladies, the springs of our physical being seem broken, our energies destroyed, our muscles relaxed, our bones to be as soft as our flesh, and our blood as liquid as water. I am experiencing the same in my moral being in a strange and distressing manner. I no longer have any strength, any courage, any self-control, nor even any power to set my own will in motion. I have no power left to will anything, but someone does it for me, and I obey. August 14th. I am lost. Somebody possesses my soul and governs it. Somebody orders all my acts, all my movements, all my thoughts. I am no longer master of myself, nothing except an enslaved and terrified spectator of the things which I do. I wish to go out. I cannot. He does not wish to, and so I remain, trembling and distracted in the armchair in which he keeps me sitting. I merely wish to get up and to rouse myself, so as to think that I am still master of myself. I cannot. I am riveted to my chair, and my chair adheres to the floor in such a manner that no force of mine can move us. Then suddenly I must go to the foot of my garden to pick some strawberries and eat them, and I go there. I pick the strawberries and I eat them. Oh, my God, is there a God? If there be one, deliver me, save me, succor me, pardon, pity, mercy, save me. Oh, what sufferings, what torture, what horror! August 15th. Certainly this is the way in which my poor cousin was possessed and swayed when she came to borrow 5,000 francs of me. She was under the power of a strange will which had entered into her like another soul, a parasitic and ruling soul. Is the world coming to an end? But who is he, this invisible being that rules me, this unknowable being, this rover of a supernatural race? Invisible beings exist, then. How is it, then, that since the beginning of the world they have never manifested themselves in such a manner as they do to me? I have never read anything that resembles what goes on in my house. Oh, if I could only leave it! If I could only go away and flee and never return, I should be saved! But I cannot. August 16th. I managed to escape today for 2 hours, like a prisoner who finds the door of his dungeon accidentally open. I suddenly felt that I was free, and that he was far away, and so I gave orders to put the horses in as quickly as possible, and I drove to Rouen. Oh, how delightful to be able to say to my coachman, "Go to Rouen!" I made him pull up before the library, and I begged them to lend me Dr. Hermann Herstrasse's treatise on the unknown inhabitants of the ancient and modern world. Then, as I was getting into my carriage, I intended to say, "To the railway station." But instead of this I shouted. I did not speak, but I shouted in a loud voice that all the passers-by turned round. "Home!" And I fell back onto the cushion of my carriage, overcome by mental agony. He had found me out and regained possession of me. August 17th. Oh, what a night, and yet it seems to me that I ought to rejoice. I read until 1 o'clock in the morning. Herr Strauss, doctor of philosophy and theogony, wrote the history and the manifestation of all those invisible beings which hover around man, or of whom he dreams. He describes their origin, their domains, their power, but none of them resembles the one which haunts me. One might say that man, ever since he has thought, has had a foreboding and a fear of a new being stronger than himself, his successor in this world, and that, feeling him near, and not being able to foretell the nature of the unseen one, he has in his terror created the whole race of hidden beings, vague phantoms born of fear. Having therefore read until 1 o'clock in the morning, I went and sat down at the open window in order to cool my forehead and my thoughts in the calm night air. It was very pleasant and warm. How I should have enjoyed such a night formerly! There was no moon, but the stars darted out their rays in the dark heavens. Who inhabits those worlds? What forms, what living beings, what animals are there yonder? Do those who are tinkers in those distant worlds know more than we do? What can they do more than we? What do they see which we do not? Will not one of them some day or other, traversing space, appear on our earth to conquer it, just as formerly as the Norsemen crossed the sea in order to subjugate nations feebler than themselves? We are so weak, so powerless, so ignorant, so small, we who live on this particle of mud which revolves in liquid air.
I fell asleep, dreaming thus in the cool night air, and then, having slept for about 3/4 of an hour, I opened my eyes without moving, awakened by an indescribably confused and strange sensation. At first I saw nothing, and then suddenly it appeared to me as if a page of the book, which had remained open on my table, turned over of its own accord. Not a breath of air had come in at my window, and I was surprised and waited. In about 4 minutes I saw with my own eyes another page lift itself up and fall down on the others, as if a finger had turned it over. My armchair was empty, appeared empty, but I knew that he was there, he sitting in my place, and that he was reading. With a furious bound, the bound of an enraged wild beast that wishes to disembowel its tamer, I crossed my room to seize him, to strangle him, to kill him. But before I could reach it, my chair fell over as if somebody had run away from me. My table rocked, my lamp fell and went out, and my window closed as if some thief had been surprised, and had fled out into the night, shutting it behind him. So he had run away. He had been afraid. He afraid of me. So tomorrow or later, some day or other, I should be able to hold him in my clutches and crush him against the ground. Do not dogs occasionally bite and strangle their masters? August 18th. I have been thinking the whole day long. Oh, yes, I will obey him, follow his impulses, fulfill all his wishes, show myself humble, submissive, a coward. He is the stronger, but an hour will come. August 19th. I know all. I have just read the following in the Revue du Monde Scientifique. A curious piece of news comes to us from Rio de Janeiro. Madness, an epidemic of madness which may be compared to that contagious madness which attacked the people of Europe in the Middle Ages, is at this moment raging in the province of São Paulo. The frightened inhabitants are leaving their houses, deserting their villages, abandoning their land, saying that they are pursued, possessed, governed like human cattle by invisible though tangible beings, by a species of vampire which feeds on their life while they are asleep, and which besides drinks water and milk without appearing to touch any other nourishment. Professor Dom Pedro Henrique, accompanied by several medical savants, has gone to the province of São Paulo in order to study the origin and the manifestations of this surprising madness on the spot, and to propose such measures to the emperor as may appear to him to be most fitted to restore the mad population to reason. I remember now that fine Brazilian three-master which passed in front of my windows as it was going up the Seine on the 8th of last May. I thought it looked so pretty, so white and bright. That being was on board of her, coming from there where its race sprang from, and it saw me. It saw my house, which was also white, and he sprang from the ship onto the land. Oh, good heavens! Now I know, I can divine. The reign of man is over, and he has come. He whom disquieted priests exorcised, whom sorcerers evoked on dark nights without seeing him appear. He to whom the imaginations of the transient masters of the world lent all the monstrous or graceful forms of gnomes, spirits, genii, fairies, and familiar spirits. After the coarse conceptions of primitive fear, men more enlightened gave him a truer form. Mesmer divined him, and 10 years ago physicians accurately discovered the nature of his power, even before he exercised it himself. They played with that weapon of their new lord, the sway of a mysterious will over the human soul which had become enslaved. They called it mesmerism, hypnotism, suggestion, I know not what. I have seen them diverting themselves like rash children with this horrible power. Woe to us, woe to man! He has come. What does he call himself? I fancy he is shouting on his name to me, and I do not hear him. He is shouting it out. I am listening. I cannot repeat it. Horla! I have heard. The Horla! It is he! The Horla! He has come! The vulture has eaten the pigeon. The wolf has eaten the lamb. The lion has devoured the sharp-horned buffalo. Man has killed the lion with an arrow, with a spear, with gunpowder. But the Horla will make of man what man has made of the horse and of the ox, his chattel, his slave, and his food, by the mere power of his will. Woe to us! But nevertheless, sometimes the animal rebels and kills the man who has subjugated it. I shall be able to, but I must know him, touch him, see him. Learned men say that eyes of animals, as they differ from ours, do not distinguish as ours do, and my eye cannot distinguish this newcomer who is oppressing me. Why? Oh, now I remember the words of the monk at Mont Saint-Michel. Can we see the 100,000th part of what exists? Listen, there is wind, which is the strongest force in nature. It knocks men down, blows down buildings, uproots trees, raises the sea into mountains of water, destroys cliffs, and casts great ships onto the breakers. It kills, it whistles, it sighs, it roars. Have you ever seen it, and can you see it? It exists for all that, however. And I went on thinking, my eyes are so weak, so imperfect, that they do not even distinguish hard bodies, if they are as transparent as glass. If a glass without quicksilver behind it were to bar my way, I should run into it, just like a bird which has flown into a room breaks its head against the window panes. 1,000 things, moreover, deceive a man and lead him astray. How then is it surprising that he cannot perceive a new body which is penetrated and pervaded by the light? A new being! Why not? It was assuredly bound to come. Why should we be the last? We do not distinguish it like all the others created before us. The reason is that its nature is more delicate, its body finer and more finished than ours. Our makeup is so weak, so awkwardly conceived. Our body is encumbered with organs that are always tired, always being strained like locks that are too complicated. It lives like a plant and like an animal nourishing itself with difficulty on air, herbs, and flesh. It is a brute machine which is a prey to maladies, to malformations, to decay. It is broken-winded, badly regulated, simple and eccentric, ingeniously, yet badly made. A coarse and yet a delicate mechanism. In brief, the outline of a being which might become intelligent and great. There are only so few stages of development in this world, from the oyster up to man. Why should there not be one more, when once that period is accomplished, which separates the successive products one from the other? Why not one more? Why not also other trees with immense splendid flowers, perfuming whole regions? Why not other elements besides fire, air, earth, and water? There are only four nursing fathers of various beings. What a pity! Why should not there be 40, 400, 4,000? How poor everything is! How mean and wretched! Grudgingly given, poorly invented, clumsily made! Ah, the elephant and the hippopotamus, what power! And the camel, what suppleness! But the butterfly, you will say, a flying flower, a dream of one that should be as large as 100 worlds, with wings whose shape, beauty, colors, and motion I cannot even express. But I see it. It flutters from star to star, refreshing them and perfuming them with the light and harmonious breath of its flight. And the people up there gaze as it passes in an ecstasy of delight. What is the matter with me? It is he, the Horla, who haunts me, and who makes me think of these foolish things. He is within me. He is becoming my soul. I shall kill him.
August 20th.
I shall kill him. I have seen him. Yesterday I sat down at my table and pretended to write very assiduously. I knew quite well that he would come prowling round me, quite close to me, so close that I might perhaps be able to touch him, to seize him. And then I should have the strength of desperation. I should have my hands, my knees, my chest, my forehead, my teeth, to strangle him, to crush him, to bite him, to tear him to pieces. And I watched for him with all my overexcited nerves. I had lighted my 2 lamps and the 8 wax candles on my mantelpiece, as if by this light I should discover him. My bed, my old oak bed with its columns, was opposite to me. On my right was the fireplace. On my left the door, which was carefully closed, after I had left it open for some time in order to attract him. Behind me was a very high wardrobe with a looking-glass in it, which served me to dress by every day, and which I was in the habit of inspecting myself from head to foot every time I passed it. So I pretended to be writing in order to deceive him, for he also was watching me, and I suddenly felt, I was certain, that he was reading over my shoulder, that he was there, almost touching my ear. I got up so quickly with my hands extended that I almost fell. Horror! It was as bright as at midday, but I did not see myself in the glass. It was empty, clear, profound, full of light, but my figure was not reflected in it, and I was opposite to it. I saw the large, clear glass from top to bottom, and I looked at it with unsteady eyes. I did not dare advance. I did not dare venture to make a movement, feeling certain, nevertheless, that he was there, but that he would escape me again, he whose imperceptible body had absorbed my reflection. How frightened I was! And then suddenly I began to see myself through a mist in the depths of the looking-glass, in a mist as it were, or through a veil of water, and it seemed to me as if this water were flowing slowly from left to right, and making my figure clearer every moment. It was like the end of an eclipse. Whatever hid me did not appear to possess any clearly defined outlines, but was a sort of opaque transparency, which gradually grew clearer. At last I was able to distinguish myself completely, as I do every day when I look at myself. I had seen him, and the horror of it remained with me, and makes me shudder even now.
August 21st.
How could I kill him, since I could not get hold of him? Poison? But he would see me mix it with the water, and then would our poisons have any effect on his impalpable body? No doubt about the matter. Then...
August 22nd. I sent for a blacksmith from Rouen, and ordered iron shutters of him for my room, such as some private hotels in Paris have on the ground floor for fear of thieves, and he is going to make me a similar door as well. I have made myself out a coward, but I do not care about that. September 10th. Rouen, Hotel Continental. It is done. It is done. But is he dead? My mind is so thoroughly upset by what I have seen. Well, then yesterday, the locksmith having put on the iron shutters and door, I left everything open until midnight, although it was getting cold. Suddenly I felt that he was there, and joy, mad joy, took possession of me. I got up softly, and I walked to the right and left for some time, so that he might not guess anything. Then I took off my boots and put on my slippers carelessly. Then I fastened the iron shutters, and going back to the door quickly, I double-locked it with a padlock, putting the key into my pocket. Suddenly I noticed that he was moving restlessly around me, that in his turn he was frightened and was ordering me to let him out. I nearly yielded, though I did not quite, but putting my back to the door, I half opened it, just enough to allow me to get out backward, and as I am very tall, my head touched the lintel. I was sure that he had not been able to escape, and I shut him up quite alone. What happiness! I had him fast! Then I ran downstairs into the drawing room, which was under my bedroom. I took the 2 lamps and poured all the oil onto the carpet, the furniture, everywhere. Then I set fire to it and made my escape, after having carefully double-locked the door. I went and hid myself at the bottom of the garden, in a clump of laurel bushes. How long it was! Everything was dark, silent, motionless, not a breath of air, not a star, but heavy banks of clouds which one could not see, but which weighed oh so heavily on my soul. I looked at my house and waited. How long it was! I already began to think that the fire had gone out of its own accord, or that he had extinguished it, when one of the lower windows gave way under the violence of the flames, and a long, soft, caressing sheet of red flame mounted up the white wall and kissed it as high as the roof. The light fell onto the trees, the branches, and the leaves, and a shiver of fear pervaded them also. The birds awoke, a dog began to howl, and it seemed to me as if the day were breaking. Almost immediately 2 other windows flew into fragments, and I saw that the whole of the lower part of my house was nothing but a terrible furnace. But a cry, a horrible, shrill, heart-rending cry, a woman's cry, sounded through the night, and 2 garret windows were opened. I had forgotten the servants. I saw the terror-struck faces and the frantic waving of their arms. Then, overwhelmed with horror, I ran off to the village, shouting, "Help! Help! Fire! Fire!" Meeting some people who were already coming onto the scene, I went back with them to see. By this time, the house was nothing but a horrible and magnificent funeral pyre, a monstrous pyre which lit up the whole country, a pyre where men were burning, and where he was burning also. He, my prisoner, that new being, that new master, the Horla! Suddenly the whole roof fell in between the walls, and a volcano of flames darted up to the sky. Through all the windows which opened onto that furnace, I saw the flames darting, and I reflected that he was there in that kiln, dead, perhaps. His body? Was not his body, which was transparent, indestructible by such means as would kill ours? If he were not dead, perhaps time alone has power over that invisible and redoubtable being. Why this transparent, unrecognizable body, this body belonging to a spirit, if it also had to fear ills, infirmities, and premature destruction? Premature destruction. All human terror springs from that. After man, the Horla. After him who could die every day, at any hour, at any moment, by any accident, he came. He who was only to die at his own proper hour and minute, because he had touched the limits of his existence. No, there is no doubt about it. He is not dead. Then, I suppose I must kill myself.